get the email I forwarded you from AZ saying?
Empathy and appreciation and acknowledgement of the situation. So that's been nice.
I just got one late this afternoon.
Are you ready?
It was just to me.
Ready? Cindy, Bob, ready?
Yes.
Oh, he did turn them on. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I call to order this special meeting of the River Falls Board of Education. This meeting has been properly notified. As we begin our time together, I am going to outline how this meeting is going to proceed. We are going to begin by hearing from visitors or delegations. Last Monday, the board spent considerable time listening to members of the community, and over the past 10 days or so, board members have received well over 100 emails, as well as petitions from community members expressing their opinions, largely related to masks. Thank you to all of you who gave us constructive comments. It's been helpful, I think, for us as board members to hear your story about how the pandemic has impacted your children as reference for our decisions. I will be welcoming you to speak tonight during the public comment time, but please keep in mind two things. Number one, if you have already addressed the board and your perspective has not changed, please allow your previous comments to stand. We've been paying attention, and you don't need to address us again. Number two, please keep your comments to under 2 minutes. In the past, the board has been very accommodating of people speaking longer than 2 minutes, but tonight I ask everyone to limit the time. Because once the public comment time is over, the board will get to work. There will be no additional time for the public to speak. After the public comment time, the school district's designated medical advisor will provide medical background relative to the board's discussion of COVID-19 mitigation. Dr. Amber Morgan, a local pediatrician, has been the district's medical advisor for many years and will provide information about COVID-19 and how it relates to our community and our region. Board members, you'll then have a chance to be able to ask questions of Dr. Morgan when she has finished her presentation. Then, Jamie Benson will provide the context and perspective for his recommendation. Previously, Mr. Benson broadly outlined options for the board, but tonight he will offer details regarding his recommendation. Once Jamie's presentation is finished and a recommendation is before the board will have discussion and the opportunity to act. I've one last thing to say before we get started. No matter how the board decides tonight, there will be people who are disappointed and do not agree with the school board's action. I implore everyone to recognize that it is possible to disagree on issues, even strenuously disagree, while still being respectful of each other. We live in a day of tremendous polarization, and River Falls is not immune. We do, however, have a choice about whether we will contribute to polarization or seek to heal division. All of us in this room are devoted to children in River Falls, and we want them to grow up in a caring, compassionate community. So let all of us show the children of River Falls what it means to treat each other with respect, grace, and goodwill. So now we will proceed to hearing visitors or delegations. When you approach the mic, please tell us your name and the school or schools that your children or perhaps your grandchildren attend.
Hello, my name is Caitlin O'Connor. I'm an early childhood professional and also a teacher educator with UWRF. I'm also a parent of 3 in the River Falls School District, and my oldest is scheduled to attend RFPME in the fall, tentatively. I say tentatively because we had to make the choice to keep him home last year, and as of now, we're not sure where things are going at this point. I'm here tonight to present you with a community petition for the school board to select option 3 of the Wildcat Roadmap 2.0. As of this evening, the petition, which was started late Saturday night, has received 270 signatures. I sent the petition to all of you earlier today, and I hope that you've had the time to review it and review the names that were signed as well. The petition states what you as a board already know. The experts agree on what should be done to protect children and other vulnerable adults this fall. Require all students and staff to wear a mask. This option is endorsed by the AAP, CDC, DHS, WDPI, and our own Pierce County Public Health Director, A.Z. Snyder. I spoke with A.Z. and she expressed regret that she couldn't be here tonight. But in her words, masking is key. It's going to keep kids in school. It will almost eliminate contact tracing. It's a no-brainer. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't want to create this petition. Measures for student health and safety shouldn't be determined by popular vote. However, since you are looking for public opinion, I wanted to show you how many in our community back the scientific consensus. I appreciate that this does not feel like an easy decision. You will receive blowback from some parents who just choose to disregard the research and science regarding COVID and the variants. But the truth is that you're going to get blowback regardless of your decision. You don't have the option to make everyone happy, but you do have the option to keep our children safe and in an environment that supports their development. Please do the right thing and require masking. Thank you.
We're not quite ready for you, Dr. Morgan. The next speaker?
Hello, I'm Trisha DeRocher. My son Ezra will be attending Greenwood Elementary this fall. I'm here to be the voice for my 5-year-old who cannot articulate why he does not want to wear a mask. I have concerns about my child's development, education, and mental health if forced to wear a mask to school. Seth Pollack, head of the Child Emotion Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, states, "There are a lot of things that are really important for communication, and human faces are definitely one of the most important. Faces have their own special real estate in the brain, the fusiform area in the temporal lobe, which is solely responsible for facial recognition. We rely on faces to glean information about emotion and social interactions from a very early age. That information then helps us inform our behavior. No sooner do infants enter the world than they start looking for faces. Their eyes are driven to faces, and within 28 hours of age, they can recognize their mother's face." From the International Journal of Behavioral Development, talking about research on the role of visual attention in social development, they state infants from newborn to 6 months of age display increased attention in scanning the eye region, whereas infants between 6 and 12 months of age showed an increase in attentions to mouth. Which then brings me to social referencing, which is defined as the process wherein infants use the effective display of an adult to regulate their behaviors towards environmental objects, persons, and situations. This does not stop at infancy. As children develop, they continue to learn from their parents and those around them up until adolescence. Social referencing is a big part of development and what children use to understand the world around them. My point to you is my son, who is still learning to read social cues and develop his social interaction skills, cannot learn all of this with his peers and teachers' faces half covered. You, the Board of Education, are appointed to put our children's education first. I beg of you to make masks optional, to create a nurturing and collaborative learning environment for our children to flourish in not only their academics, but in their social skills as well. Thank you.
My name is Jill Ewald Shane, and my daughter's possibly entering the Montessori. Please make masking our children optional. I'm really disappointed there wasn't a survey sent out to parents regarding the stance on masking. Isn't it hard to know what the majority of parents you're representing want to know without a survey? Please leave the masking choice up to parents. Please make masking optional this year.
Hello, I'm Josh Hastings. We've got 3 kids, 2 in the middle, 1 in high school. Jamie, I've talked to you on the phone a few times. I'm against the masking mandatory deal. As far as science, we can find science anywhere on the internet that supports whatever view you got. It's the right on the CDC website. If you go there, the first study they talk about is one in Vietnam in 2015. Talks about cloth masks in a hospital setting, and at the end of that it says 97% ineffective and against an acute respiratory illness. That's the first study they talk about on the CDC website. So it doesn't really do anything. The particles are so small. If you pull somebody's finger and you can smell it through your mask, it's doing the same thing for the virus. So it's just I'm just telling you, for my kids, I gave them the option, and they said they would take the homeschool. If they got to wear a mask, we're pulling them out. So if that affects your budget, that's the only thing we can do is I don't want the mandatory mask. So I didn't plan on speaking, but that's what I got to say. Thanks.
My name is Martin Kretzman. My wife and I live here in River Falls. We have 3 children in the district, 2 next year in the middle school and 1 in high school, I think. I can't remember how old they are because I'm a terrible dad. I'm running for Pierce County Board of Supervisors in District 8 this next spring, and my platform is firmly planted on individual freedom, liberty, and choice, especially when it comes to medical decisions regarding my children. I fully grasp these words can be triggers for some here and listening tonight, and that's unfortunate. No expert in the medical field. I know we have those people here. In fact, I never graduated college. What I lack in formal education, I have a graduate degree in fear. Fear is a powerful thing. Fear creates its own problems. Fear is paralyzing. Fear makes you question your own motivations and your own decision making in the face of uncertainty. I would challenge those people here tonight that would like to make decisions about my children that your mindset is based on fear, not facts. There's risk in everything that we do. Is there a chance that my child would contract COVID at school? Yes, there's a chance. However, that chance of that is so minuscule it's hard to quantify. Last spring, this board indicated the summer school was being mask optional would be an indicator of how this fall would be decided. Where are those numbers? How many students contracted COVID during the summer school session while in class with masks optional? I've heard too many times, including just at last week's meeting, that my children who have legitimate diagnosed medical issues, that they should just do online schooling if they can't wear what I call airway coverings. I would suggest that if you're worried about your children, keep them home. The local, state, and federal levels of government, including this board, do not get to make decisions related to the health of my own children. Too many parents have given up these rights willingly in the shadow of fear and the vague idea of protecting other people. I love my children dearly. In fact, I care about all the children in this community. This has been our new home for the past 16 months, and there's no other place I'd rather live. None. I can't speak for anyone else, but I'd like to make one thing very explicitly clear. Myself and other like-minded folks are not anti-anything. We get painted with a broad and inaccurate brush. I'm not anti-mask, I'm not anti-vaccine, and I'm not anti-science. What I do is I stand for your individual choice to make decisions related to your children, their bodies, and their health. If masks and future vaccines are mandated or required at this school, especially with no reasonable accommodations for children with legitimate exceptions, we will more than likely be pulling our children out of this district, and you'll lose the funding that comes with that. I would suggest all parents do the same. Regardless of your opinion on this topic, freedoms that are taken away from you are rarely, if ever, returned.
All comments need to be limited to 2 minutes or under.
I'm Sarah. I have 2 kids in the district, one at Greenwood and now one at Meyer Middle. We moved here during the pandemic in 2020, and I picked Rivers Falls because of your schools. They were even higher than some of the best schools in the Twin Cities, and that's why we fought so hard to buy a house, which took forever because of the pandemic. It hasn't been a great experience because of the pandemic. Both of my kids have some pretty severe health issues that made them so they can't technically wear masks. And my daughter is going into Meyer Middle, and she struggled the most because she's at the age where she wanted to make friends. She wanted to be social. She wanted to enjoy all of the things that she could do in this new school district, and she knows she'll be here until she graduates. But she couldn't do that, so I had a lot of crying. I heard things that no parent should ever have to hear, including that she'd come home crying and saying, like, why am I even alive if I can't make friends? She made like 2 friends this year because she got stuck at one table with one other kid and had to face the same direction, and that just broke my heart. And then my other kid, I wondered every day why he came home and said, Mom, I have a headache. And then we went and got testing on his stomach issues, and they told me, yeah, his CO2 levels are extremely high. And I said, well, why? And the nurse said, well, he was wearing a mask during the test, and he wears a mask at school. And I said, yeah. And even though they had the exemptions, I made them wear the mask because the amount of people that said that their kids were getting bullied or talked to because they weren't wearing masks, I didn't want my kids to go through that again. They already have done that. So if anybody wants to wear masks, I'm not against masks. I don't think they work personally. I even read the boxes that say, these will not protect you from COVID or airborne illnesses, but I just don't feel like my kids can wear a mask, and I feel like we all deserve a choice to wear one or not. So that's my take on it, and I would like to say thank you for being listening to us and being here tonight.
My name is Nick Cudd. I had 4 children in your school district. I now have 2 because of last year I pulled 2 out. Looking at doing the same thing with the other 2. I guess my number one concern right now is if you guys went with option 3, which is crazy. But how are you going to validate or find out which one of those students in the high school and middle school have had their vaccine? Are you going to start mandating it, or are you going to have a card? Are they going to? I mean, that's a slippery slope, you guys. All this is a slippery slope. It's an overreach. These are my kids, not yours. How many of you people are in the health industry? I mean, I feel like you guys are making your own opinions and forcing them on to us. This is America. Let us decide that stuff. Don't take our rights away. Thank you.
Lori Wilson. I have 2 kids in the district, and I'm alumni of this district myself. I just want to say thank you for last year and how well you managed a pandemic, and still were able to have most kids have a in-person school experience. I initially held my 2 boys out, and we went through, I think through the end of March, and I felt really good sending them back knowing your success rate and how well we kept COVID at a minimum. I read Jamie's letters every week, celebrated every time I saw that those numbers had been low. We have a Delta variant now. It's multiple times more infectious than the last round. We know this, okay? We know it's here, we know numbers are going up. Why not just keep doing what we know worked last year? Why are we trying to reinvent some policy or go away from a policy that worked? You guys did a great job. Kids need to be in school. My boys need to be in school. And if there are parents who don't feel comfortable or want, you know, I'll tell you, my kids did the Zoom education last year with their teachers. You can see their faces on Zoom. You can see all their faces, facial expressions, everything. That is an option, okay? If you don't want your kids to wear masks, the option is virtual school. We did it. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. You know, the Delta variant's not going to be here forever. You know, we know the end is ahead of us. Hopefully more people will get vaccinated, you know, knowing that that's the right thing to do for their community. And this isn't going to be a forever decision, but for right now, why are we even entertaining doing anything else than what we know worked so well? Thank you for your time.
I'd also want to thank you for all the work you've done in the middle of a pandemic and unprecedented times. You gave our kids a good, solid education, and I thank you for that. My name's Laura, and I'm the mom of a high school student and 3 graduates, and we all want to go back to normal. We all hate wearing masks, all of us. But COVID-19 is still present in our community, and in fact, COVID-19 is evolving to an even more transmissible and powerful virus. We can't pretend everything is fine and go back to normal. COVID has disrupted our lives, our systems, and our kids' childhood. Agreed. I'm also a nurse. My colleagues and I mask every day, all day, no exceptions, and we hate it too. But we do it because we know it is the simplest and most effective way to minimize the spread of COVID-19. Vaccinated or not, people can have COVID and not even know it, and this means that self-reporting symptoms and self-isolation cannot be relied upon to prevent transmission. We know masking is necessary to stop the spread of the virus. We see patients suffering. We see those that die. We see those that have to live with the lingering health effects. We see frantic families that can't visit their COVID patients or family members. And we see those that struggle with knowing that they gave them COVID. Our health systems have been shut down because we didn't have enough resources to care for COVID patients and all of our other patients at the same time. This isn't theoretical. This isn't a news story. This isn't propaganda. This is real. This is my job. If it hasn't affected you yet, you're lucky. We can help our kids learn good masking habits. It's like hand washing. They weren't born knowing how to do it. They don't love it. We had to teach them by lesson, by example, and repeatedly. Good hygiene reduces the spread of germs. Masking is just the good hygiene skill that prevents COVID-19. Reducing the transmission is the way to keep students and staff in the classroom. Now, I know the board has been reading reports from many sources and relying on facts and science to keep our students and our kids safe, and I thank them for that. This is not the place for emotional decision-making. It's not the time to get into the loudest, angriest voices because they make us uncomfortable. It's the time to review facts and the recommendations of the many experts on health, infection prevention, and public health policy. Option 3 is the only option that will give our students and staff the best chance for spending as much time as possible in their classrooms with their peers.
My name is Kay, and I graduated from River Falls High School in 2019. I'm currently studying English education at UWRF and have a sister that attends the high school. I will do my best to be brief, but I believe that option 3 is the only option to keep our community safe. As a person wanting to go into the field of education, I would hope that my future school board would do all that they can to keep myself, my colleagues, and my students safe and healthy. My younger sister is not able to be here, but wanted me to make a statement on her behalf. My name is Anna, and I am a student at River Falls High School. I have various disabilities that make me especially vulnerable to get COVID and to be more severely affected if I were to get it. I have made it through without contracting the virus so far because I have followed the mandates that I knew would protect me. I stayed socially isolated, I wore masks, and I got the vaccine. Other kids do not have the ability to get the vaccine, leaving themselves dependent on the actions of the community to keep them safe. The only option I see is to have everyone wear a mask. Without this, we will continue to spread the disease and risk compromising our learning, our friends, our hardworking staff, and our community. I understand that all of you are under pressure to please everyone, but right now, that is not the goal. The goal is to keep students and staff in school so they can learn while also keeping them safe and healthy. Thank you.
My name is Levi Carell. I have 2 sons in the River Falls School District. I absolutely agree that if you're at risk for COVID that you should protect yourself, but I don't think what the other gentleman said about having putting your beliefs on our children or your beliefs on us. So if you guys go with masks mandatory, we'll be pulling our kids too. That's all I got.
Hi, my name is Shannon McCabe. I have an 11-year-old who attends the Montessori here in town. I, first of all, want to thank you. You guys have a thankless job right now, 100%. I honestly don't envy any of you, but I would like to share other sides, you guys. There's a lot of science. My husband's a doctor. We've been in the field for 15 years. We believe our health is our responsibility. We are raising 3 daughters to know that it is their choices, their actions that determine their health. We choose not to mask, we also choose not to vaccinate, and have 3 beautiful, healthy, smart children. It is our choice to decide what they do until they are old enough to choose for themselves. Just as there are many doctors and nurses that are super impassioned and feel really strongly for masks and for vaccines, I can tell you there are many, many, many on the other side. There is science on both sides. There is reason, there's logic, there's respect. I don't want to force anybody to not mask or not vaccinate. I simply want that same respect and that same choice for my family. Thank you.
My name is Rachel McCardle. I am a River Falls alumni. I went from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and I am a UW River Falls graduate as well. And I have 2 children that would be in the Greenwood district. Follow the science, listen to the experts, do it to protect others. We have heard these 3 things on repeat for well over a year now. I have questioned this narrative and the manner in which we were all blindly supposed to follow it from the beginning. I kept my thoughts to myself, and I understood some people might wish to follow these orders and these mandates, but the time has come to share my thoughts. 1, science is never settled, and I'd like to remind you that just like politicians, science can be bought. 2, many of the so-called experts we are supposed to listen to have conflicts of interest, and anyone who goes against their narrative is immediately silenced. I believe all sides should be equally presented and not censored. 3, why are we following a one-size-fits-all approach? When it comes to healthcare, especially the healthcare of my loved ones, I want an individualized healthcare plan. The do it for you or others, not you, could be said for many lifestyle choices like diet and exercise, but I don't see any big push to encourage those things. The healthcare decisions that are best for me and my family might be different from yours or any of yours, and I am not going to put what I do with my family onto your plate. I have watched neighbors turn on each other. I see children living in a constant state of anxiety. I have seen the leaders of our country, all the way down to the leaders of this community, pick and choose when and which rules they want to follow. Our children have had no say. The parents have had no say. We are not privileged enough to pick and choose. If anything, we are publicly shamed for trying to do what is right for our children. It is time for all parents to say enough is enough and to take back the decision making when it comes to our children. Body autonomy is our right. Informed consent is our right. A public education is our right. These unlawful mask mandates go against these three things I just mentioned. As leaders of our community, I beg that you make masks optional and not mandatory. The school board has no place making medical mandates. You should be educating, not mandating. Please put the power back in the hands of the parents where it belongs. Let them be the medical advocates for their children. Do not stand in their way. Unmask our children.
Good evening. My name is Stacy Wagner. I have 2 children in the school district. I wasn't really sure if I was going to speak tonight. I have actually spoken before, but I felt there was something new, although my mind hasn't been changed, that I needed to share with you. I spoke before the optional masks were put forward early in the spring. I wasn't sure if I was going to share because sometimes I don't know if public comment actually matters at this point in the evening, if it really matters in a vote. But I do feel that there are some things that really should be shared. I'll continue to stand here and say thank you to all of you, because from what I can see, you're in a very difficult position. You're going to make some of us very mad, no matter what the decision you make tonight. Whether I agree with your position or not, or whether we are in a pandemic or not, you are serving this community, and I appreciate that. Not enough people participate in local government, so thank you. Now, for the reason I'm here, it's no surprise that you have probably received, as you mentioned, emails, calls, and heard very passionate individuals here tonight on both sides. Well, we're passionate because they're our children, and we know you care about them, and you're trying to make the best decision. So we have one thing in our favor this time as we go into the school year, and that's history. History is on our side, and I share with you 2 stories from my parental perspective. I have a child in high school who suffers from headaches and increased anxiety and exhaustion from the masks. And it was a challenge having her go to school. The social emotional side and the physical reaction to wearing masks is no joke. Even when there are plenty of studies saying that that's not real, I promise you it is. And as a parent, it's hard to parent. My son, who is a very social person, I watched suffer from the social emotional impact of masking and the other efforts in place. In previous years, I watched him flourish with his teachers and classmates. Last year, he never formed that connection with his teacher. He never once saw her smile. He never once hugged a classmate. He even had a child who he has had in his class since kindergarten not recognize him this summer because of masking and the cohorts. It is nearly impossible as a parent to regain that love for school when you are beyond the first couple of years. As he finished his elementary school year, I watched that love for school die because we had no choice. And that is why I started speaking out, because I can't bear to watch the social, emotional impact on our children again. We cannot discount it. There are just as many studies that say masking doesn't work. There are just as many studies that show other ways to help stop the spread, as we say. And I really, really hope that you will listen and take into account that side of it as you vote tonight. please do not discount the fact that not all students are resilient. Not all students can weather through the storm of what that means. Thank you.
That was awesome. I love personal stories like that, so I don't know how I'm going to follow that, but here we go. Sarah Bachland, my address is 573 Omaha Road. This is our school district, but we have pulled all of our kids from it. I did have a petition that was sent around, which was sent to you. We had 279 people sign it in favor of making masks optional. Please forgive and bear with me with my statement. I had to cut much of it out as I was sitting here. Someone stated that infections and cases are happening at a higher rate. Yes, but without illness. These kids are not getting sick. A few statements. Conservatives have been ignoring these ridiculous mandates for nearly the beginning. I can hear you saying that it is us that have made the pandemic continue. If it were true, would there be any conservatives standing anymore? You've heard many stories of people who have gotten vaccines and have also contracted COVID. This is also science. The biggest thing I'd like you to take away today is that you do not have the power to stop a virus. None of your mitigation efforts will ever achieve what you want it to do. A virus will run its course. A vaccine will also not stop the virus. It is incapable of doing so because it is a respiratory virus. I know you know that. You say you are following the science, following the local public health officer's science. Please remember that her advice, everything that she's saying, these are recommendations that you're following. They're not her mandates. So you have the option to choose. I'm almost done. The other thing I see happening is the perceived authority that you seem to think you have. None of you are medical doctors. None of you should be making decisions to mandate anything pertaining to health. It is not your job. You are an education board. You should be focusing on education alone. Please consider that children should not have to bear the weight of keeping anyone safe, especially to their own detriment. I heard one person say at the last meeting that mask optional doesn't work because teachers and staff weren't making her kid wear the masks. Again, I'd like to remind you that this is not their job to instruct your children how and when to wear their masks. Their job is to instruct on math, reading, writing, and history education. Jamie, you in the meeting prior to this summer stated that you will see how the summer of not masking goes. What happened to the follow-through with that statement? Lastly, in this room there are people, these people are not going, look at this room. These people are not going to let you use their kids as pawns anymore. They are done, I am done, we are done. Vote the right way, please. It will be remembered. In conclusion, I can see you are striving for peace in the community with trying to balance keeping kids in person and masking in order to do so. But what you fail to take into account is that in doing so, in preparing for this peace, you may also want to prepare for the fallout, perhaps the war that will follow. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sherry Magnuson, and I have 2 children that will be in your high school this year, and I have 1 that graduated. I hope I'm not going to tell you something you've already heard. I agree. My kid also has headaches. We have a Costco bottle that lasted us 6 years. Had to throw it out because it was outdated. We went through 3 bottles this last year because of headaches. So if you're going to mask, I need your help on what to do for my children that are coming home with headaches every day. That's what I need help with. If you're going to mask these kids, I'm telling you, my children are sitting there with their masks on and they can't read the teacher's face and expressions. They can't read their lips, nor can the teacher see that my child is struggling and not getting it. And nor is he going to raise his hand and say, I still don't get it amongst a bunch of peers. It is so hard to do. So I'm watching my AB kids get C's and D's. And it really frustrates me when we sit at conferences and the teachers say, just do the assignments with the most points because that'll get him up to a C- and he'll pass the class. I'm telling you, we came to River Falls because it has always been a fabulous education. My son just graduated. He feels he got a fabulous education from you guys. He's on the other end of it. I have 2 kids that now after this school year will be 2.5 years of this. That's 2.5 years of not getting the education that he needs, or my daughter. So they're really struggling. So if you do the mask mandate, then we need to start spending some time talking about what to do with these kids that are having headaches and the anxiety that they're having in classes. They come home crying. My daughter comes home crying. She's having anxiety because she can't breathe, and if she takes off her mask, she'll get in trouble. But the dress code, anything goes as long as you're wearing a mask. I hope the school board understands that and knows that's what happened at your high school this year. My kids tested it. They didn't get in trouble. I'm appalled and I'm upset. I think that's pretty much all. I hope that you guys have always done a good job prior to COVID of educating our kids and making the kids that came out of River Falls be awesome. Cutting their curriculum in half and half again didn't make them awesome. So that's all I gotta say. Thanks.
Hi there, I'm an 8th grader at Meyer Middle School. And last year, I think you should make mask optional because last year, every day I dreaded going to school. Every day I'd get yelled at 8-10 times a day by the teachers, wear your mask, wear your mask. I think the teachers should worry about learning and teaching the kids how to do it. And like the last lady said, if they didn't worry about no dress code, but you wear your mask, you were good. Every day I would dread going to school. You should make masks optional because the chances of kids getting the coronavirus is very low. And Dr. Fauci said last year on March 9, 2020, masks don't work on 60 seconds. Masks don't work in my opinion. You don't need to. That's what I gotta say.
Hello, my name is Roxanne Ross, and I believe I sent all of you a little, probably a lengthy email earlier today, and I did speak last May, but I just wanted to make a little bit of a comment that I'm wondering as we sit here listening to everybody speaking, could we please see the proposed options for the roadmap? Because we've had several people mention option 3, option whatever, and I know there are people in this room that aren't even aware of what you're about to propose. And, you know, I don't know if that's done on purpose or what it is, but you've said that once you go into your conversations, you will not be taking any more comments from the group. And so I think it's only fair that we share what we're about to learn as we issue our comments. And I'll just real quick say that, again, in my email to you, I talked about the contact tracing and the effects that it had, especially on older children in the high school. And I too still feel very strongly about that. And my question back then was, what percentage of River Falls students who were contact traced it out last year actually contacted COVID-19 as a result of being contact traced out? And we still have not seen any of those numbers which are certainly available and are able to make some sort of a summary. So again, I do ask that as you consider the contact tracing proposal and protocol. Thank you.
My name is Matt Bachland, and I'm husband of Sarah Bachland over there, same address. We sent our daughter here. She was a high school student, so I remember watching performance on the same stage you're standing on today. We went to games here. It was a whole different world here at this high school in the past, and she had some really good memories of that. However, due to everything that has unfolded, we had to pull her out of school here. We had to send her over to a private school where they didn't have all these mitigation procedures in place. She thrived, the students thrived, they played sports, they hang out, they did everything, they ate together. Nothing changed in that world for them. Very little illness happened last year for them at school. We're very happy for that. However, now we look at a new school year and we're having the same debate again. And I believe a lot of the people who talked about fear, we are all pawns, and they're watching how this unfolds. And the game and the system looks really good to them. They are taking freedoms one day at a time. They're pitting people against each other. At what point are you willing to stand up for the freedom that eventually you will feel like they've taken too far? The masks are a great way to make people quiet, complacent, and now it affects our kids. Trust me, I know the financial burden of sending your kid to a private school, and that's what happened here. So this is just not a physical thing, emotional thing, it's also a financial thing for some parents who don't have any other option. And I wish this high school would have been a place my daughter could have continued. She lost a lot of friends. She goes to school an hour away from home. That means for the parents, we drive 2 hours a day to take her to and pick her up from. 5 days a week. Just think about that for a second. That is what your action tonight will do for some of these people here tonight. There's going to be a financial burden of them taking out of school here, and there's also going to be sometimes economical with the distance they're going to have to drive. So that's what I had to share, but I want to speak on behalf of my daughter. She couldn't be here tonight, so thank you.
I see one more comment.
So you guys got to hear a lot from
Could
different...
you please tell us your name and the schools that your children attend?
You bet. Michael Van Handel, I have 4 kids, all going to Rocky Branch Elementary School. And again, I want to answer your question. Contact tracing, my son was up 4 times with contact tracing. Never got sick. None of them did. Nobody in our house ever got sick. I work from home. How did I get sick? I got COVID. I lived through it. We didn't quarantine within the house. We stayed home because that was what we were supposed to do. Nobody else got sick in my home. 4 kids, nobody sick. The other thing I'd like to point out is even though we're going to hear from our expert in a minute, our doctor, we could find doctors on all sides to validate, to bring us up to speed. The science is so dirty right now. You can find, like you said, an opinion or a fact or science on either side to validate anybody's opinion. But we need to look at what's happening in our homes, in our districts, and with our kids. I will verify, I have 4 kids that come home every day with headaches. They ride the bus, they go to school, they wear those masks, and they come home. My son tells us he goes to the bathroom to get fresh air. How screwed up is that? He goes in a bathroom stall to get fresh air at an elementary school. Just keep that in mind. If you're going to bring a medical doctor, I say we also have a psychiatrist here that talks about some of the emotional pieces.
I expect this meeting to be respectful.
Hi, my name is Tanya Weideman. I did not expect to talk at all. I have a large blended family. I had 2 graduate last year. I have 4 in high school this year, and a little girl going to 4K this spring. And I have to say, the masking thing, we had all the physical, the anxiety, the depression, the whole works. Going to school, they go to the counselors quite often. Miss Whitney I was on the phone with Whitney continually dealing with our girls because of the masks and the anxiety throughout the day. The one thing is you get the choice. You can mask or maybe go online, do the Zoom classes. I'm telling you, that was completely... Zoom classes, they didn't have to log on. They didn't have to show their face. The teachers, I had 4 teachers say, hey, just get the assignments done. Hey, do 50%. If you could just do 50%, we'll pass you for the class. I have A and B students, and now they're CD students. And they want to go to college. One plays hockey, varsity this year for the girls, and she had to wear masks for hockey. Every day she was sick. The masks for high school kids, my 4K, who's going to be 4, she had to wear a mask on the bus the other day for a field trip to Glen Park. A bunch of 3 and 4-year-olds. It makes no sense. And to be part of a 4K program, which is run by the school district, the Abundant Life said, yes, we run the 4K by the school district, that all these kids will have to wear masks throughout the day. A 4-year-old? My 4-year-old would have to wear a mask. I just don't feel that that's appropriate for any 4-year-old to have to wear a mask. Let alone any of our kids, because 4 of them, out of the 4 in high school this year, 3 of them developed anxiety, depression issues. Fortunately, they're on meds now. I am an RN in the community. I work with a lot of mental health patients in the community, in their homes, and it has not been a great year. And I'm very involved with the schools, and I'm telling you, if we could just make it optional. And those that want to mask, mask. If you don't want to, you don't have to.
My name is Lisa Thompson, and public speaking is not my forte. I am most comfortable in my clinic office where I do mental health therapy. I've worked for 16 years over the course of my kids' lives doing therapy. And I recognize the terrible place that you're in. You've heard loud voices, impassioned voices talking about what we want, and this is a tough place to be. And I've seen it in the kids. I've seen what a tough place it is, but I've also seen incredible leadership by parents who want to keep their kids safe, who make the choice to provide the leadership to wear the masks. What I've noted is no one calls in sick to come see for the therapy appointments. There's been very little illness in my clients all year, and I believe that's because of the masks, not just COVID, but other illnesses too. Kids rely on us for our leadership. These are not decisions to be made by children. Mask optional is just telling the kids they don't need their masks, because no child in elementary school is going to stand up and put on their mask and wear their mask when no one else is doing that. Even my 90-year-old mother won't do that in the grocery store unless other people are wearing their masks. So it's not a child's decision, and it requires the leadership of the adults. People are saying this shouldn't be your decision, but of course it is, because you have to take into account the health of the students as well as their educational health. This exactly falls in your lap, and I'm sorry that it does. I'm sorry it's been such a terrible year. But we're not there yet. The difference between Delta and the other variant is enormous. 1,000 times more viral load carried in your nose with Delta compared to the other virus. We don't know what this will look like in the community, so we have to prevent it. And I hope you will make the decision to continue to do what worked so that our kids can get past this. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chris Gagne. Sorry, I'm struggling with something else, and I'm a little emotional about this topic too. I live on Kennedy Street here in town. I got a 6-year-old that goes to Rocky Branch. When she comes home sad because she can't play with the kids next to her, and she can't go out on the playground or go to lunch and play with the kids that she grows up with and she knows, that's huge. When we heard something about having a medical doctor here but not having a psychologist, I think that's the #1 problem that we have. I'm going to backtrack. I was elected to city council in River Falls. I served 7 years. I'm no longer on the council. I got a guy to run for MIC because I have some personal family stuff that we're working through. Who knows if I'm going to run for at-large next year? I'm not sure. I'll make a decision by December. That's not why I'm here, right? I'm here because you have an enormous task. I've seen a lot of the dashboards personally that you guys have seen and worked through. That's a hard job. You're not going to win on either side of that, and I hope that people, no matter what side you're on in this place, can come out knowing that these folks have an incredibly hard job to do. And I respect you for that. I don't care which way you vote on that. I respect you for the decisions that you have to task and put for our kids. I think you've done an awesome job educating our kids over the years, and I hope to see that continue, right? That said, this isn't just about masking, right? That's a big topic on the agenda, but you send my kid home and quarantine my kid because another person might have gotten sick. That happened numerous times last year. My kid didn't get sick once out of your schools last year. She got COVID this summer from one of her family members. My whole family got sick. I was sick for a couple days. My wife had a fever of 102 for a week. Very similar to a flu. I'm not saying it's the flu because COVID is a lot stronger and deadlier, right? For people that are vulnerable. But what did all these folks do over the years when they had a vulnerable thing? Did they wear a mask to school? Did they keep themselves away from other people that might get them sick? I grew up with a girl that had cystic fibrosis, and she couldn't come within great contact. We played with her, but she had to separate herself, wear masks, and do all these things as a kid. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. But that said, what are we doing to protect ourselves? Where's our personal responsibility in this? And I would ask you to vote on that today. It's a personal responsibility. Make masks optional. If there is a kid that can't go to school, they do have the option to do the virtual school. Why does my kid have to make a decision to come home with headaches, come home with a mask, come home with the psychological damage that happens because we're quarantining our kids, because we're putting all these other mitigations in place when we've got 120 people in here. 15, 16 of them are wearing masks. If the camera could show that, there's about 16 people in here right now wearing masks out of 120. All these people are going home to their families. Every single one of them. And their grandparents and whoever else they come in contact with at the grocery store. So we're going to tell our kids they have to wear a mask when they're coming home to us, when they don't get sick, by and large, when we do. I think that's a great point to look at here today. I understand you have a hard job. I hope you vote option 1. I said it to one of your other board members in a private conversation. I will still send my kid to school if they have to wear a mask, because I can't afford to keep my kids out of school and send them to a private school. That's a great thing that some people can do. I love the education that you guys have provided over the years, and I hope you can continue doing that. But don't undercut my kids' education either. Don't make them do 50% of the work. I'm fortunate to have a wife that works part-time and she works from home. She's able to instill a lot of that and spend a lot of time with my kid. A lot of these other parents don't have that. They work 2 jobs. They have to take care of their families. Please keep our kids in school. If that means my kid has to wear a mask in school, I will still send them. But I'm asking you to vote option 1, because that's my personal right to make medical decisions for my family. I don't think that's your job. But I get it. You have the general health and safety and welfare of the school. That's what my job was in the city council, and I appreciate that. Please vote option 1.
Hi, my name's Brady Raverty, and I had no intention of speaking, so I apologize for everything that's going to sound completely jumbled. I actually don't have any children in your district anymore. They both graduated and are currently adults. So congratulations on creating wonderful children. I thank you for what you did for my kids. I was an active, involved parent all these years. And that's why I'm here today, because I'm trying to help all the other parents and help all the other kids in this district. I've been a nurse for over 23 years, and one of my jobs as a nurse is I advocate. I advocate for my patient's right to choose. And I'm advocating today for my parental rights to choose the health direction of my children's care. I would hope you would take that into consideration. I am obviously for an optional masking option with the school district. But there's something that I really haven't heard a lot about, and maybe that's just because I'm just brand new to the scene, to be quite honest. I'm impacted by all of this myself with my nursing career. Is where's the option of, I think some people are starting to talk about it, but personal responsibility. I don't know about you all, but in order to protect myself for the last year and a half, I eat well. I eat whole foods. I stay away from processed foods. I use nutritional supplementation in order to get my body to the best immune process I possibly can. I elevate that vitamin D, and I understand how immunity works. I've researched, I've tried to dig in. I don't just trust the couple of letters that are out there telling me medical information. I try to do the best I can to understand everything about this for me and my family. And I teach and I advocate that to them and anybody that will listen, including the nursing students I instruct. So I urge you, please, don't just look at certain letters for your education and your understanding for things. Look to a lot of different resources and consider teaching nutrition, proper health care, and the ability to help prevent infection if it does arise, instead of just putting a mask on. That's not the answer. It's protecting your body internally out. Thanks.
So we've been at this for an hour, and at some point the board does need to get to its work. So I'm hoping that we can wind down the public comments.
Hi, Angie Krause, River Falls. I'll try to keep this brief as I have emailed you guys a lot. I have a lot going on here, so I'll try to kind of figure out without repeating myself too much. We all remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? To not overwhelm our hospitals and clinics. Well, we're at about 78 weeks and counting, and here we are talking about masks optional in our school district. I do support making masks optional, as well as dropping all the mitigation efforts and testing, quarantining, all that. It just all needs to go away. Parents are concerned with the education system for good reasons. First and foremost, masking. We all know this is not good for child development. Children need to see human reactions. They need to connect and see expressions. It affects their speech and their language. It's the foundation of early education. Schools and administrations are putting pressure on parents to vaccinate their children. Our administration claims it's a choice, but conveniently works it into our options, 1, 2, or 3, that we were presented with last week for children in person. Option number 2 actually segregates the children. Can you imagine if you have an elementary student and a 7th grader? One gets to exercise their freedoms and have a choice, and the other has to go to school without a choice? I don't support number 2 at all. It's discriminatory and it's divisive. Are 2-year-olds eligible to be in this school district? I don't know why that was recommended. It seems crazy to me to mask any children. But last year it was 5+. Now restrictions are getting tighter. Now the option was to possibly start masking 2 and older. Transmission's low, numbers are low. School leaders are now taking the role of telling people what to do with their health. Vaccines, masks, mitigations. Teacher unions have more power than you as a parent. They're all united and this is organized. We know they're teaching CRT, anti-Americanism, pushing vaccine, pornographic material. I hear this from other parents. Not necessarily in our community, but it's happening in the state of Wisconsin. And I hear about it. It's alarming to see these things. When you as a parent no longer control your child's body, when the state can tell you what is going into your body, when the state has removed themselves from all liability, it's time to withdraw your children out of the system if you can. The district will lose funding, roughly $14,000 per child. Maybe they will listen then. Let's do some positive reporting and stop adopting this conditioning and fear. You guys talk and there's conversation, but there's never anything positive. Like, hey, transmission's low, we're on track, things are looking great. It's all negative, doom and gloom, and I'm sick of it. Please support health freedom and allow parents to make all medical decisions that best suit their family, and please vote for choice. The other thing that nobody's talking about is people who have had COVID and now have robust natural immunity. I mean, look at this school year and the numbers. I mean, you can clearly see that the numbers have dropped in our community. We don't have children getting sick and parents getting sick. The numbers are low. What happened to the flu, too? You know, I did ask for a survey. You guys didn't want to do one. I'm not sure why you didn't want feedback. Anonymously from the staff, there's teachers who are in this district who can't speak out. For fear of getting judged, losing their job. I started a petition back in May that received 353 signatures. Well, then it was 317. It only gained a little bit of traction over the summer because we all thought we were going back to school this fall with masks optional, because that's what you chose to do in June. So it's interesting we're sitting here now revisiting this. Elmwood is in Pierce County. They have gone optional masks. Menominee has gone optional masks. I sent you guys, sorry, I'll wrap it up. I sent you guys earlier the optional, the school district's going optional, and I hope that you follow suit. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Erin, and I have 3 children that will be attending the elementary school this year. And I just wanted to speak on behalf of those of us in support of wearing masks. I've heard a lot over the last 2 meetings of parents saying, you know, it just doesn't affect kids. They're just not great spreaders. And I just want to point out, you know, where have you heard from the people who've already had COVID? My husband and I contracted COVID from our 4-year-old who was in the 4K program last year. Shortly after his classroom quarantined, he had a runny nose, nothing out of the norm. But my husband and I ended up quite ill, missed a lot of work. I'm a teacher in another district. My students suffered immensely from this. And I'm in no way judging the classroom that he was in at all. Asking 4-year-olds to stay fully masked all day is very difficult. But we saw pictures of them from school, super happy, half masking. That's how it happened, is that not being masked. As soon as we had the symptoms at home, we immediately masked. We had our kids mask at home. We didn't want to spread it to anybody. Once we were recovered, we took our kids in and had antibody testing done, and our 2 youngest children tested positive for having antibodies, even though they had hardly had symptoms. Our oldest son, who will be 11 shortly, did not have any antibodies. He did not contract COVID from him, and so I'm here asking for your vote to keep our kids masked until we have that option to get them vaccinated, because he didn't get it. He's still very vulnerable, and you know, we've heard from both sides that, well, you can just choose to keep your kids home, and I can't. What would happen to my students for the year? Where are they going to find a replacement for me and all of my students if I can't come back? And not only that, but I can't afford to keep my kids home while I don't work. So I'm just asking for that from this aspect, where I'm hearing a lot from people in support of the right to choose or the right to not mask at all, and I'm asking you to please protect those 4th and 5th graders who don't have that option yet. I'd love to see you revert to the option of it being optional or not requiring masks once children under 12 can get vaccinated. But I appreciated last week when the board pointed out that you've always been a proactive district. You don't wait for disaster to strike, that you do things before it happens, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that you're not waiting for disaster to strike our community, and that you're putting our kids first. And that's really what this is about. It's not about our perceived uncomfort for them. I wore a mask all last year. I worked with students who wore them all last year.
I'm not seeing that suffering that maybe other people have talked about, but I really hope you'll consider keeping our 4th and 5th graders, especially those kids that are close to that 12 years old who could show more symptoms. Please keep them in mind as you go to that vote. Thank you so much.
So at this point, we're going to transition into the next stage of the meeting. And so I'm going to call on Dr. Amber Morgan to come and address the board. The board is not made up of medical experts, and so school districts need to rely on a physician to help provide guidance for us in everything from what you do when you have lice to now a pandemic. Dr. Morgan has been this person for many years now, and so she is going to come up. I welcome you, and I appreciate it. This is after a very long day of seeing patients that she is willing to be here with us tonight.
Jamie, did you get my slides?
Pardon me? Yes, the slides.
Okay. So, again, I am here today. My name is Amber Morgan. I'm a community pediatrician. I've practiced in this community for over 11 years, close to 11 years, I should say. It's 11 in September. And I have been your official volunteer physician advisory role for more than half of those years. I can't recall exactly how many, but it's been a lot. And I'm here tonight because I care about the kids. I volunteer for this position because I care about the kids in our community, as I know all of you do as well, in choosing to serve for the River Falls School District Board. Next slide, please. I'd like to take us back to last year and just remind you guys how proactive you were. You did a great job. We did do in-person for elementary through 6th grade. As somebody pointed out to me from your board, this was somewhat novel in that not all school districts did this, and that was wonderful. I'm glad we did that. We also had the hybrid option, or the hybrid for the 7th through 12th graders, and then the online option that was available. I would point out the many layers of COVID mitigation that you guys put in place and how successful it was. We had masking, we had cohorts, we had contact tracing, we had testing, we had hand washing before meals, we had upgraded ventilation systems in our schools, which are still there. We had separate waiting room for COVID symptomatic children in the schools, and then assigned seating on the buses. And so this was a multifaceted, coordinated risk management operation, and it worked great. So I applaud you. Next slide. We're here tonight because I know you guys are deciding. I didn't put your options up there because I figured you guys know them. Next slide. Our goal for all of this, which is the CDC's goal, the American Academy of Pediatrics goal, I imagine your goal, and actually probably everyone here's goal, is to keep our kids in school. We know that with mitigation steps, we are able to keep kids in school and at a much more consistent rate than if there are no mitigation steps for COVID-19. This is out from the CDC. They, again, first and foremost, recommend in-person instruction, which is what you guys are advocating, and I applaud you for moving from the 7th and 12th graders to now in person rather than hybrid. I do think that will be helpful from a mental health standpoint and a social emotional development for those students. Vaccination is certainly the leading public health way that we can get this pandemic under control, and that's what the CDC is outlining here. They tell us that because of the highly contagious Delta variant, that is why the recommendation has changed from just unvaccinated individuals to all individuals in schools should be wearing a mask. And the reason is that anytime we congregate indoors for long, extensive periods of time, more and more viral particles are put out into the air, and we need to protect each other from breathing each other's particles through the masks. Next slide. The American Academy of Pediatrics is made also up of experts. Over 70,000 pediatricians across the US participate in this group. There are epidemiologists, there are infectious disease doctors, They put out a statement that is based on evidence available now. Their recommendations are that we know that transmission can be prevented when proper prevention measures are placed. We have the goal of keeping students in person. Next slide. All students older than 2 should wear face masks when in public schools. I know that we have questions about why the age is 2. That is the age that the American Academy of Pediatrics feels it is safe for a child to be able to wear a mask to decrease strangulation risk. There are children in hospitals who wear masks at age 2 and up. Children with leukemia, cystic fibrosis, you name it, they do it consistently, easily, all the time. And then the other point that the AAP puts out is that, of course, children should receive the COVID vaccine when they're age eligible, if possible. We know that vaccination rates in our community, once those are higher, the spread will likely be lower within our community. Next slide. So a year ago when we were doing all this, we didn't have a ton of data of what worked and what didn't. This list is compiled by an epidemiologist in biostatistics. She got these studies that you see listed here off of the CDC website that is up to mitigate COVID. So I just want to walk through a couple of those studies. So in Missouri, they had several mitigation processes that they put in place, and they did find that there was much less COVID spread in their hospital or in their schools rather than in the community. In Utah, they were unable to comply with the 6-foot rule that was recommended by the CDC at the time, and they still found that masking and other mitigation processes that they placed helped decrease and prevent rapid spread within their schools. The one that's the most interesting to me is the one that was done in Wisconsin. This is out of Wood County, Wisconsin. And they found that the students who were masked and existing in cohorts very similar to what we did in our school district last year had a much lower rate of contracting COVID and spreading COVID within the schools. And then lastly, in Florida, there was a study done that found that schools that had a multi-layered approach to COVID mitigation versus just a very small layered approach or no approach certainly saw lower rates of spread of COVID within their schools. Next slide. This is a graph from that study in Wisconsin. You can see the solid line at the top that goes straight up is the spread of COVID within the community of Wood County and in Wood County in Wisconsin. The dotted line was the spread within the school district, and the bottom dotted line that hugs the bottom line is cases attributed to being caught within the school. Next slide. Layers of defense. This is the Swiss cheese model used in medicine to mitigate risk. In hospitals, this is what keeps people safe. The more layers you have to mitigate risk, the more you prevent bad outcomes. In 2020, we had all of those layers of mitigation that we discussed. I'm concerned that the more layers we take away, the more spread we're going to have in our community and potentially the more bad outcomes we might experience. Next slide. The other thing that other speakers have pointed out, and I know you are well aware of, is about Delta variant. It's here. It's more infectious. There's higher viral loads. The R0 of Delta variant is estimated to be somewhere between 6 and 10 versus the previous variant, which was around 2. Vaccinated individuals now can spread Delta. This is something that's new. This is something that we're concerned about. It should be pointed out that while they can spread Delta variant, they're contagious for a much shorter period of time, according to current data. The next thing is a quote from Dr. Kosciolik, who is a pediatric infectious disease specialist, and he's just pointing out that, you know, when it comes to children, there are a significant increased caseload with the Delta variant than previous cases. previous variants. Next slide.
Could you please, Dr. Morgan, on the last slide, just clarify the RO? Basically,
sure.
How that relates to the number of people that would potentially be infected compared to the RO on the previous strains?
Sure. So that is, if I am the case of COVID, I am likely to spread it to 6 to 10 people versus an RO of 2, or an R naught, of 2, and I'm likely to spread it to 2 people. So you can see how this might exponentially sort of domino effect. If I have one student in my class of 30 who gets COVID and they spread it to 5 of their classmates, and then those folks spread it to 5 more of their classmates, you can see how quickly our schools might shut down if something like that were to happen.
Thank you.
This is just a graph put out about the circulating variant of the Delta being higher right now. You can see on that last line, that was at the end of July, and 83% or so were of the virus circulating, and positive Delta or positive COVID was Delta variant. Next slide. This is just explaining the R naught that I was just discussing in a more schematic form. Next slide. So why do we care about this, right? Our kids don't have enough immunity. There was a study done in Texas that similarly another parent just talked about, right? They had COVID in their house and some of their kids didn't get immunity from that. In Texas, they did a study and they found only 30% of children had antibodies to COVID-19, which means that there's 70% of their population within that study group that was still quite vulnerable. Children under 12 are ineligible for vaccination. We don't even have the option to protect that cohort of students. Our vaccination rates within the US, there's 27% of 12 to 15-year-olds that are vaccinated and only 34% of 16 to 17-year-olds. We actually are doing better according to the CDC statistics within our adolescent age group of around 41%. But I'd like to point out that you need somewhere between 70 and 90% of immunity within your communities in order to achieve herd immunity and decrease the spread of a virus. This is consistent with some of the other airborne viruses that exist, such as measles and so forth. Next slide. So why don't we just let the kids get it? I've heard an argument about that. Why not? My kid didn't really get that sick. Well, there's several reasons. One is that 45,000 kids did get really sick this last year. This is just from August to August data. And they required hospitalization. Some of them required ICU stays and ventilation. COVID is now the 10th leading cause of death in adolescents. We all know that when we are asked to quarantine because of a close contact, or if our schools have to shut down, families are affected by that. Family units are stressed. They have to stay home from work. People are having to stay home from school. That's why we don't want it just to spread rapidly. Keep people at work. And then the known complications of COVID in children and adolescents, this multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children is very serious. We don't have great treatments for it. It can often show up a month after infection has occurred. Other things, including clinical and subclinical myocarditis, place our athletes at increased risk for sudden death after COVID. And we actually have to do extra screening with our sports physicals now to ask about COVID and do some extra screening if children were very sick with COVID. And that's recommended by the various cardiology societies. Some children actually go to cardiology to be cleared. And then in kids, we don't know about this long COVID yet. Obviously, the data is still emerging on that, and we won't know for probably quite some time. Next slide. This is the slide I'd like you to really focus on and pay attention to. This is the slide of children in the US hospitalized with COVID-19. You can see that the numbers are relatively low overall compared to the US population. However, it's rising. Our peak in the yellow, so in that middle graph right there, you can see that the peak occurred kind of in the middle of winter, right, of children being hospitalized. This coincided with all of those mitigation practices that schools and everybody was doing around the country. There were a lot of districts that were home during that time, and there were a lot of states that had mask mandates all across their states, which definitely probably mitigated those numbers. We had a great honeymoon phase, and then now within the last month, since Delta variant has reared its ugly head, you can see the spike at the end of the yellow line in that middle graph. Another thing to point out is that when the spike occurred and the peak occurred in the middle of the graph there in the winter, cases were actually decreasing the week before, whereas at the end, we still have seeing a 40% rise. So it's no end in sight, basically. Next slide. We're hospitalizing record numbers of children. Half of the children in our hospitals today are under 2 years of age. Most of the others are between 5 and 10 years of age, too young to be vaccinated. And this was from a doctor who's working in New Orleans. Next slide. I want to give you a little bit of a case study because our vaccination rates are similar to those of another state who are experiencing a rapid rise in COVID right now, and that's Arkansas. So you can see our Pierce County data over here on the left on who's vaccinated and by how much, and then the Pulaski County, Arkansas data on the right, and you can see that Pulaski County, there are actually higher percentage of adolescents vaccinated. Next slide. This is Arkansas's current hospitalization rate and rates for children with COVID. The top one is the number of cases. You can see that back when they had a spike in the number of cases, that was at the beginning of 2021 in January. You can see below the correlation in the hospital rates. So on the left side of the graph is the January hospitalization rates, and on the right side of the graph is the December, November hospitalization rates. What I want to draw your attention to is that red line in the middle. You can see that while the case rates are increasing at a logarithmic rate, they are not as high as the total cases or the spike that they saw with COVID-19 earlier in January. On the second graph, you can see that their case rate of hospitalization has surpassed their peak of hospitalization back with their case rate spike. What does this tell us? This tells us that the Delta variant is affecting children more significantly, more severely. Next slide. This is just the number of children within Arkansas in July. The percentage of the COVID-19 cases by age group, you can see that blue line on the left is the children under age 10 and what percentage of the total COVID burden within the state that occurred. Next slide. So I'm going to take you through just the last month of what COVID has done, and keep in mind this is when the Delta variant initially emerged. So you can see, if you know your geography, Arkansas is kind of where that red cluster dot is. Next slide. I'll have you just scroll through these. Each one of these pictures represents a week's time. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So that's the end of August, or the beginning of August. Next slide. This is our most recent map. And we are almost all of us are in high or substantial transmission of COVID-19 with the Delta variant. Next slide. This is the Wisconsin-specific map. This was last updated, the picture I have here was last updated on August 7th. You can see Pierce and St. Croix counties over there on the left side. We are still in substantial transmission rates. We are not yet in high rates, but the counties surrounding us are getting there too. Next slide. This is our current Wisconsin percent positivity rate. Again, you can see the spike in the middle of the graph there. This is back when our hospitals were full. Our ICUs were full. We were having difficulty at River Falls Area Hospital finding beds for sick patients. You can see on the right side of the graph, we're above that 5% positivity rate that the Public Health Department is recommending to mitigate spread within our communities. Next slide. So again, I just want to reiterate, I'm here to try and just present the facts to you. This is what we are seeing in the medical community. The doctors are alarmed. The pediatric infectious disease specialists are alarmed. Hospitals in the South are having trouble with COVID-19 and children with COVID-19. We know that our goal is to keep children in school. That's everyone in this room's goal, from what I heard tonight. Our biggest risk for COVID is, again, in indoor prolonged settings with close contact with other people. We need a multi-layered approach to mitigate COVID spread. This is that Swiss cheese model that we use in hospitals and all other medical settings. And while I respect that the school is not a medical setting, during a pandemic, unfortunately, you kind of are, because this disease is spreading. Studies show that masks are a common denominator for helping mitigate COVID-19. I would strongly encourage you to follow the guidance of the CDC, the AAP, and all of those hundreds and thousands of people really who helped form those guidelines. Masking does not really interfere with the gains that we've made from an academic and social emotional standpoint. I've talked to many teachers who have had no concern whatsoever about this. We know that the primary thing that affects social emotional health and wellness of children is loss of a parent, experience of a hospitalization, and not being able to be in school with their peers. And then vaccination rates are too low in our community right now to really prevent spread. We haven't had an opportunity to protect our younger children, and it is the medical community's opinion that it would be wise for us to continue masking our students. And next slide. That's what I have. I'm happy for any clarification points from the board.
Thank you. That was a lot for us.
Sorry.
Nope, that's what we asked you for. So, questions, comments? This is our chance.
I have one really quick question. So with the RO of 6 to 10, once it gets going, it goes fast. Much
Correct.
faster than the original COVID, is that?
Correct.
And what are our options to change direction then, once it gets going? What are these states doing?
Well, if you've paid attention to the news, the governor in Arkansas, who previously signed something into law prohibiting school boards to do mask mandates, actually has reversed his position based on the rates of hospitalization and the concern from the medical community. And so they're working on a way to get around that.
Thanks. I do pay attention to the news. I just wanted to make sure we all were on the same page.
Could you please clarify about the level of immunity that a child could potentially have from contracting COVID and how that potentially protects them from future infection? I know you can't predict every individual child, but just what are some of the issues again?
Sure. So we know with the rise of a new variant that people who've had COVID-19 in the past can get it again. And it doesn't necessarily protect you completely from getting severe illness as well. As far as the percentage of folks who get COVID who then have positive immunity rates, I don't have those numbers on the tip of my brain.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board?
I do have a question about masking. And I know there's been some conversation recently about kind of the different types of masking. Masking has become a very general term. And I've reached out to a couple of different physicians over the past week or so, and I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit to the different levels of masking. I know, was it Dr. Osterholm out of the University of Minnesota has come out recently with some information and some opinions about the cloth masking. So can you kind of give us an indication as what's the difference between the most effective mask to least effective, and kind of inform us as to how effective masking is with the different kinds of masks?
Well, certainly your respirators, which are medical grade N95s and such, you have to get tested for that. So that's not something that's widely available to the community. We wouldn't recommend that. That said, more of your medical grade masks, surgical masks, for example, definitely have decreased particle transmission with those. As far as your cloth mask, it's better than nothing, right? I know that we would love all of our kids to have surgical level masks, but a cloth mask is still better than no mask.
Are N95 masks considered surgical masks? Where do the N95s fit into that?
The N95s are the masks that we wear in the ICUs when we're intubating COVID patients to protect ourselves. Okay. They're used in hospitals, primarily.
Okay. And then just one other question, as far as the transmissibility of the Delta variant, we're hearing so much about that, and I'm just interested to know what you think, how that impacts some of the mitigation efforts that we have in place. Is it more likely that this is going to spread even with mitigation efforts in place?
We're probably going to have COVID in our schools no matter what you all do, to
So,
be perfectly frank.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's so important. Dr. Morgan, I'm so glad that you're here, because I think it's important that we inform the people in our community and that they have the chance to hear the information. I think that's really, really important. And so I think that's an important thing to mention, is that because this is so transmissible, we can't stop the Delta variant, but there may be things we can do to slow it down or prevent some of the spread. Am I like in my very layperson way? Am I explaining that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I mean, so we would like to prevent the spread of the illness. We'd like to prevent hospitalization rates, but most importantly for the school and our purpose tonight, I'd like to prevent the schools from having to shut down, like we did last year, right? We did have to close one of our elementary schools for a short period of time due to an outbreak, and so that's still entirely possible even if you do everything. But our hope and what the data shows is that if you do a layered mitigation process with all of those different layers, you're going to decrease the likelihood that happens.
Dr. Morgan, thanks for coming this evening. You're obviously recommending masking of all individuals. I'm not sure you can answer this question, and I'm not a medical professional, as been pointed out before. But if you have two individuals that are masked, what you're saying is the protection level's probably much higher than you have people that are not masked. That's obvious. What if one individual is masked and the other is not? How much does the level of mitigation drop if you have just one of two?
I don't have the exact number, but a lot. Which is why mask optional is suboptimal.
Is it? I mean, if you could assign a percentage, maybe you can't. I don't know.
I can't give you a percentage because I don't know, number one, if that study has been done, and as has been pointed out, your masking, your mask type, your ability to wear it correctly, all of that's going to play a role. Yeah. But I do think that the studies have shown that people who are all in masks decrease the spread of COVID-19 compared to communities, That community spread graph you saw from Wood County, there was a mask mandate in place when that study was done. There was a Wisconsin-wide mask mandate. When people were indoors, they were supposed to be masking. And so I think that shows that those two layers of mitigation with the masking and the cohorting actually worked really well within that community. And I suspect if we had done data here, we probably would have found similar graph results.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask another question? I'm so sorry. I have been trying to dig into so much information in the past 10 days or so. But I'm interested in, when you referred to the school in Wisconsin, that was last year's strain. So so is it possible that the lack of spread was due to the fact that kids really just weren't transmitting this disease back and forth as much as the Delta variant?
Probably not. Probably not, because we did see across the country schools that did not have those same mitigation processes in place actually did have to close more frequently.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, Stacy, I have one more.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Could you pull your mic a little bit closer to you so that everybody can?
Yes, sorry. Okay, so in my research and what I've been trying to learn and look at, I've really been looking at the CDC data, particularly the death rate amongst kids 12 and under, because we know that population is not eligible for vaccinations yet. So in looking at that, as a mom of 4 young kids, I'm very reassured that the death rate is still, I think, for the past several months, 0.00 per 100,000. And I understand that the Delta variant is raging right now in states like Florida and Arkansas. But when I pull that data up on the CDC website, I can actually isolate Florida and Arkansas, and the death rate of kids 12 and under is still at 0.00 per 100,000. So am I misreading that data because I don't know what I'm looking at, or how can you speak to that in comparison to what you shared with us this evening, which indicates that the Delta variant really is affecting kids in a very serious way?
So a couple of things about that. The first thing to understand is that everything lags, right? So first you have rapid logarithmic spread of COVID-19. That takes a little while for those people to get sick enough to be in the hospital. So a lot of times your hospital spikes is going to be a week, maybe 2 weeks after your rapid spread. Mm-hmm. Following that is usually the death rate. And so while we aren't seeing the death rate right now, it's possible that it's going to spike or it's going to increase. Now, how much? I don't know any better than any other medical professional out there. But I will say that, you know, it's good reminder that yes, it's probably going to be okay, and yes, even if we have an outbreak, maybe we won't have a death in our community, but we know that that's entirely possible if those outbreaks occur. We want to prevent that and do everything we can to try and prevent that. The other thing I wanted to speak to, your question reminded me of, is just that they are anecdotally seeing a more rapid and quicker death rate in unvaccinated young adults, which I actually have a large concern for our parent population. There was another speaker who mentioned that their 4-year-old brought it home to their house last year, and that would be a concern of mine. While the students themselves might not suffer, you can imagine what they would suffer if they lost a parent to COVID. And helping to keep the spread in our community down, part of that would be masking in our schools.
Another possibly impossible question to ask you, but I will anyway, as long as we've got you here. You talk about layers of mitigation, and vaccination is probably one of the top of the layers. If you were, what is the most effective mitigation strategy after vaccinations that we're using, or we have used, I should say?
Yeah, so I would say from the available data, it's probably masking. You know, all of those studies that I pointed out to, masking was the common denominator between all of those. Can I give you a percentage of what masking mitigation does compared to cohort, compared to, you know, keeping symptomatic children separate in their own waiting room? I can't. But I do think that because the AAP and the CDC have really very clearly said, these are the things you need to do. You need to vaccinate and you need to mask, and that will help decrease our rates.
Thank you.
Dr. Morgan, one of the things that we're talking about is that it is a relatively low rate of children who die from COVID. Now, from my point of view, any child's death is one too many. That's just, especially when we can prevent it. But I also imagine there is quite a range between a child who has a stuffy nose and a child who dies, where there could be long-term consequences, where there could be severe illness, where there could be other things that crop up Am I accurate in thinking about this, or what would your response be?
Can you say that one more time? I'm not sure I fully understood.
Sure. Well, I'm just thinking about the fact that there's a range of experiences for a child potentially having COVID, from no symptoms to a stuffy nose to the few children who end up regrettably dying from COVID. But in between those two extremes, there have to be a variety of different kinds of experiences and symptoms and lingering long-term consequences. Can you comment on that or give me some other perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, you point out something great, right? Like some kids, they get the runny nose and then they're symptom-free within 24 hours, and they test negative, but they still isolate and they can go back to school and everybody's happy. In between that range, of course, is the cough, the high fever, the things that can last for a significant amount of time, the things like dehydration that can land you in the hospital. I know I mentioned to you guys in my letter, I personally had one of my patients hospitalized with COVID last week. So it's not like this isn't happening within our community. And keep in mind, I'm one of, how many medical providers do we have in our community? We have 20, 30? I don't even know the whole number, but we have quite a few. And so the idea that it's not here because our numbers aren't high, or that it's not going to affect those in-between cases, is just simply not true. Not every kid who gets it is asymptomatic or has a runny nose for 2 days. A lot of kids are having the high fever, having to be out of work and childcare and things like that for weeks at a time sometimes, depending on the severity of their case. And then, like I pointed out, the multi-system inflammatory disease, you can be one of those kids that has that runny nose and everything seems fine and nobody else got sick, and then a month later end up having multi-organ failure from this inflammatory disease that doctors don't necessarily have great tools to help. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. Anything else? We've taken a lot of your time, and you've shared your expertise, and thank you very much. We know you have patients tomorrow, so it will not be rude when you need to leave.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, next up on the list is Mr. Benson with some background and some context, and then eventually a recommendation.
The approach I'm taking with the school board, we have the practice in this district that the superintendent provides the board with a recommendation rather than putting items on the agenda and just let the board talk it through. And it's a starting point when I bring forth a recommendation. It doesn't mean that it's a rubber stamp. In this case, this evening, I don't know what the outcome will be for sure, what I put on the table, but to be clear with all of you, it's a very humbling position to be in. I've heard so many different stories about why you are passionate about your own position, and I've come to the point where I think there's truth in everybody's story. I think we need to not suggest that they're all wrong and I'm all right and whatever. There's truth in all these stories. There's truth in everybody's concern, whichever side of the fence you want to line up on this. And so in my position, not only is it very humbling to be the one that is in a position to bring forth recommendations, I would also call it, with a little tongue-in-cheek here, it's both a blessing and a curse. With that being said, my PowerPoint presentation, I think, is going to tell you two things. I'm hoping that it's going to address some people have concerns that maybe there's so much fear that's being painted in the media that we're scaring the you-know-what out of everybody, when in reality, if you peel back the onion and you look at the layers of the data that's available, what is the death rate? And so what I did is I put together some statistics essentially from the state of Wisconsin DHS website. You'll see some data that also includes, so somebody asked earlier, how'd it go this summer? I have a link in here. I'm not going to get into a long story about a summer school report for you, but I can tell you that there's data and there's link for you to look at later that's also available about all that. So I'll jump in just by saying that the approach here will be that I'll ask the board to approve our Wildcat Roadmap 2.0. Last year we had Wildcat Roadmap. This year it's version 2 of that. Inside of it, it's interesting to me that there's so much conversation around masking because in my job, I have to consider a lot of other things as a part of these mitigation efforts. And all the attention, 99% of the attention is on masks. And so I'm hoping to clarify a couple of other things that have very little to do with masks, like some people brought up contact tracing and quarantine. I personally heard more complaints towards the end of the school year about contact tracing and quarantine than I did with masks last year. It's a big deal. So, Aaron, if you would, just the second slide up is our district priorities. We actually have like 5 of these priorities, these guiding principles. I picked off the top 3 just to say that obviously safety is a concern to us. With safety, we do also consider the social emotional side of safety issues as well, not just the COVID, the virus, and so on. In-school learning is a priority for this school year. Learning lessons from last year tells us that we want our kids to be in school. If you choose the virtual e-school option, we're going to try really hard to make that a wonderful experience too, but we want to keep kids in school 5 days a week and not have that hybrid version we did last year, frankly. High priority. And then we want to consider everybody's story, and included in that is medical professional stories, personal stories, and all that goes with it. There is a link to the Wildcat Roadmap. That's not what this PowerPoint presentation is. It's not the map. That's another different document. The link is there. I may pull it up later, but I'm going to just stick to my PowerPoint slide. And so on this particular Wildcat Roadmap slide, forward please, Mary Aaron. Again, that's the link. And I want to be clear coming out of the gate here that any of the decisions that are made today, folks, they could change tomorrow, they could change next week, they could change a month from now. Whether you want to hear that or not, I'm pretty confident that this board will monitor the COVID conditions and adjust accordingly, and that will not be what you hear tonight you might celebrate, and what you hear a month from now you might not be too pleased with. But just to be clear, I want to say that whatever the decision is tonight, it is subject to potentially change. How will we know if we're going to change? There will be indicators. And the word indicator will include multiple factors. So on to the next slide, Aaron. The indicators are, really how we would try to assess risk, how we would do risk management. And so I personally am drawn to the DHS of Wisconsin website that allows you to click through, and I put the link on here to get you there. It shows a 7-day average, and there's 2 ways of looking at that, and I'm going to show you some 7-day average stats here in a minute for us, right here in this school district. Not New York, not Florida, not Arkansas, not Dane County, our school district. I'm going to show you some numbers. Next slide, please. Complex decisions, obviously. Again, risk assessment. Is COVID and this new Delta variant dangerous for children? How dangerous? At what cost do we mitigate? At what cost is it worth putting a mask on versus I'm a concerned parent about the social emotional side of that? At what cost will we mitigate? Masking students takes away their ability for them to properly learn and socialize. It takes away the ability for teachers and students to clearly communicate with one another. No denying it. Nobody's going to say that that's not true. The question is, how far will we go to mitigate? What compromises are we going to make? And frankly, I would say if the vaccine had proven to be better than advertised, we wouldn't even be in this position. I chose the vaccine. Our family chose the vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm just saying, had the vaccine been better than advertised, COVID would have been completely knocked out. There wouldn't be this new Delta variant. More people would be believing and choosing to vaccine. We can come up with all kinds of things, and if it was better than advertised, I'm telling you, I believe we would be in a different place today. It is what it is. Next slide. Complex decisions. Again, this talks a little bit about certainly COVID, all things COVID related, caused, my opinion, I don't have the psychiatry degree hanging on my wall, but I have a lot of years in being a father, a grandfather, and an educator for 36 years, and my observations of what took place in this community last year is that I wouldn't deny that mask has some level of adverse effect on children, but I would also say there's a whole lot of other things, if we're going to call a spade, about COVID that caused a lot of stress and anxiety on our children, and it wasn't just a mask. COVID was rough on our kids in a lot of ways, not just a mask. Next slide, please. So, some facts that we know about today's status of COVID. There's a growing variant. New York and Florida, they were on the news a few weeks ago, and now they're joined by many other states, and the doctor showed us a progressive slide of how this variant is spreading across our nation. Truth be told, just like we have a rule at the supper table with our kids, you can either eat peas or carrots tonight, one of the two. You're going to get one of them. And in this case, you're either going to get COVID or you're going to get the vaccine. That's where this is at, folks. This is the direction we're at right now. You're either going to get peas or carrots. The other thing that's notable is that the data lags behind the plague. You can't gather data ahead of the actual plague becoming entrenched in your community or in your county or in your state or your nation. So the data always lags a little bit behind. So we're trying to look at the trajectory and the future and anticipate what might lie ahead as we do all of this. Next slide, please. So the Wisconsin DHS, American Association of Pediatrics, Department of Public Instruction, local physicians, they all recommend layered mitigation efforts, including mask indoors for schools and so on. Next slide, please. Lessons from summer school. We've had kids club, summer school, and lots of school and community sports. I don't know about the community numbers. I can tell you in the school numbers, we had 2 COVID cases this summer. That summer activity report tells you some more details, like how many participants and so on. Next slide, please. Hospitalizations. So quit trying to scare us and quit trying to make it sound like if my kid catches COVID, they're going to die. Stop putting fear in me to say that if my child contracts COVID, they're going to land in the hospital. I'm going to call it what it is right here. This is a slide from 2 days ago. This is Wisconsin-specific DHS. You can see the yellow number, the age bracket 0 to 9 and 10 to 19. That's our school-age children. It's 2%. Currently, the data lags the plague. And so this data doesn't necessarily include the potential impact that Delta will have, but that's what I have for today. Next slide, please. Here again, same deal, more tragic slide. I hesitated to put it on here. Deaths by age category. Wisconsin. This isn't the nation, this isn't the world, this is Wisconsin. Next slide, please. This is cumulative totals. This is for Pierce County. When did all those deaths occur of the age groups that were affected? There was 44 people that died in our county. And it was between November and January was the primary spike. And it was during that time period that we shut down Rocky Branch for 2 weeks. We shut down the middle school for a couple weeks. We had high school, I'm going to say roughly 5 weeks at home completely, not on the hybrid, coming to school 2 days a week. The peak was happening. The numbers were causing us to react and respond. That's what was going on in that time frame. Since April, there's been no deaths. Pre-Delta strain. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to give you a historical perspective. Back in that Thanksgiving time through the month of December and into January, I grabbed one slide that I had shared at a previous board meeting. This is December 14th. And this is the data that earlier I said I personally am drawn to this 7-day average data that's available, and I provided the link in this PowerPoint presentation for you to go there and find it. 44.60, that's the new daily confirmed cases within the River Falls School District, not the state, not the nation, not the county, in our school district. Boundaries, but it includes all ages, not just school-age children, all ages in our school district boundary. We were floating at about 13 cases on average per day. The 7-day rolling average turned into 44.6. That was in December. Next slide, please. May 27th, the school board made a decision to say starting June 7th, we're going to go optional. On May 27th, that's what the numbers were. Aaron, go back to the last slide. Next slide, please. No, I'm sorry, forward. So the numbers were much lower. A decision was made on a host of things, but to illustrate full transparency, at the time of that decision, nobody was talking about a Delta variant. We saw the numbers low. We said, let's try it in the summer. Somebody alluded to that with their comment earlier. Benson proclaimed, let's try it and see what happens. Next slide, please. July 30th. This is school district boundaries. You see the numbers ticking up slowly. I am not an alarmist. I said slowly. Next slide, please. August 6th. Numbers are ticking up slowly. Doctor referred to Delta variant. She said, it's here. Probably not in full strength yet, but it's here and it's coming. Next slide, please. Today. A number continues to tick up from 2 days ago. It will continue to tick upward. It's going to, for a while. I'm not going to ask Aaron to go back and say, well, what's the hospitalization rate and death rate for school-age children? I showed you already. Pretty darn low. Next slide, please. That's just a summary of really the story I was just telling you that kind of then on the left side shows how bad it was in December, how good it was in May, starting to tick up July 30th, so on and so forth. The numbers are ticking up slowly, but nowhere near where they were at in December. Next slide, please. The Wildcat Roadmap, my recommendation is to go with option 2. It requires masks for PK through 6, largely due to the rationales that I've listed below. There's more than one rationale there. I clumped it all together. Children under age 12 are not eligible for a vaccine. That's the main card I'm putting on the table here. COVID variant transmission and symptoms are projected to be worse than previous strains. The doctor talked about that. I just got done showing you some slides that shows that our numbers in our school district are slowly climbing. Along with other safety measures, masks are the best way, short of a vaccine, to ensure in-school learning. I said that was a priority we have, is we want to keep kids in school. And then in my chair, in that humbling chair that I sit in, please understand when I'm listening to everybody's story and I'm saying everybody's story has truth to it, I have a hard time in the superintendent's chair when I look you in the eye every day pre-COVID and said, we're going to bust a hump and we're going to do every can. I promise you, we're going to keep your kids safe. After that, we're going to develop a relationship with them. And after that, we're going to teach them how to read and write and do math. But the first thing we're going to do is promise you we're going to keep them as safe as we can. And in this chair as a superintendent, I'm already fudging on what the experts are saying by allowing, with my recommendation, to say it's optional in grades 7, 12. I'm just sitting here tonight, I'm putting forward this recommendation of option 2, knowing full well that the board ultimately will decide. It may be the direction we end the evening with, and it may not. Next slide, please. The kids are watching us. They're learning from us every day. It matters how you talk at home to your kids about your disagreement with any decisions. It matters what you're teaching your kids. And I'm at the top of the list. I hate it when people say certain things and then they say, I apologize if I sound like I'm preaching to you now, telling you how to parent. But our children are listening, but I'm saying it anyway, all right? I'm sorry if it feels like it's preachy to you, but however we talk to our kids at home, it makes a difference, and we have opportunities to teach lots of lessons to our kids, and right now maybe some lessons could be about how we're trying to manage things in a civil way, unlike we see other disagreements and controversies around our nation being handled by some people. So Aaron, if you would go back to my previous slide, I'll be quiet now. That's my recommendation to the board. Well, the indicators, Stacy, yeah, thanks. Actually, one additional thing to indicators. I mentioned I wanted to talk about that close contact tracing, and it's in the Wildcat roadmap. I'm just going to just say it by narrative. I didn't put it on a slide here. We're loosening up on this one. I would call it loosening up. We are taking a different stance than what the CDC would say and other agencies. We're saying we're going to start the year off this way, that the district is going to notify parents of students who were in a classroom or in an activity, athletics, whatever. We're going to notify you that somebody in your classroom or in your setting has tested positive. We are suggesting to parents that you keep an eye on your child's symptoms, get them tested if you want, keep them home if they're sick. You got the steering wheel. We're reserving the right. That's in stage one. We're reserving the right. Right is probably not a word everybody wants to hear. We're putting an asterisk on this to say that rule might change too. We might go back to last year. We might go to the 3-foot or the 6-foot rule, and we might have to get tighter on contact tracing based on these indicators that we're seeing, the 7-day rolling average. The numbers of positivity rate, how many people who are getting tested are showing that they are testing positive. The number of cases in our house, in our school. How fast is it spreading? We're going to have to keep monitoring that stuff. So close contact tracing coming out of the gate, we're giving you the steering wheel. We're going to let you know somebody in your child's classroom tested positive, and we're going to ask you to be a parent. Cooperate with us. Don't send them to school if they're sick. Keep an eye on their symptoms. Take care of your kid. Things go south, numbers start creeping upward. We have to take a different approach. We're going to take a different stance on that, just like we will with all other decisions. There's other details, inside of this Wildcat roadmap. The two biggies, obviously, are masking. This contact tracing has been weighing heavy on my heart, frankly. If we're gonna do, we keep hearing the need for multiple layers of mitigation, and the more layers that we remove, the riskier we're making it for your kids and for our community. Recommendation is on the screen.
And now, school board, it is our opportunity to be able to discuss, take action if we choose to.
I've got a couple comments. I've been quiet tonight listening. I made most of my comments last week for those of you that listened in and interested in hearing some of the other board members' comments tonight. I've been especially interested in the emails we've been getting this week. Wow, our email boxes have just exploded. And all I can say is I'm struck by the passion and deep concern. I'm struck by the number of people who had in their email, "I am deeply concerned," or something to that effect. And the struggle is, of course, that whatever we decide tonight, there will be parents and families in this district who will feel that we have made a decision that puts their kids at risk. And I hope everybody out here realizes that just because you feel you're right doesn't necessarily mean that someone else doesn't feel just as threatened or just as concerned as you do. In fact, I'm more concerned about the deep divide we seem to have in the community right now, maybe than I even am about the pandemic, but it's another issue, and it's something we're going to continue to talk about as a board. We're going to probably have some votes tonight, and we're not going to all agree, because as a community we don't all agree, so you're going to all see yourselves probably reflected in some of the votes down here, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Our job is to listen, and our job is to take our time, and our job is to do this with due deliberation, because that's what we're elected to do, okay? Our job isn't to make up our mind and then come in and push and shove and demand that other people agree with us. It's to talk through this, because in the end, this isn't the only thing on our agenda. Before this, we had a budget meeting. We're talking about the budget. We're talking about where we're going with our students and our educational. There's lots of things this board has to work together on. So as we talk about this and work through this, we're going to come together with some kind of a decision here in our votes. I'm not quite sure where those are going to be. So having said all that, last meeting I talked about my concern about the vaccination rates, which have gone up a tiny bit in the last week. I did track that down today. I talked about our overall concern and well-being of kids, and it's important for everybody out there who's paying attention to this meeting tonight to realize that just because we may not agree, me as a board member and you as a community member out there, that doesn't mean that I don't care about your kids. I don't care about the safety of your kids. We just may have slightly different ways of getting at that. So we all have our own circle of friends, and I'm kind of struck by the fact that we tend to have these bubbles now where we're talking to each other and we think that everybody thinks what we think. And reading all those emails, I'm really struck by the real differences of opinion, strong differences of opinion that exist in this community. So having said that, we asked the administration here typically, as Stacy said, to give us an administrative recommendation, because that's what we hire these people to do. We have a really, really good administrative team in this district. They're really smart. So typically they'll bring a proposal to us. We ask them to bring a proposal to us for us to react to. We can vote it up or down, or we can change it or whatever, but that's a place to start. And I'm usually committed to supporting most of or all of an administrative recommendation. However, this one I can't. I can't support option 2. It just doesn't seem that it's the kind of thing we can manage part of this. As someone said in one of the emails this morning we got, we can't split the baby on this issue, and we're probably going to end up going one direction or the other. And a whole bunch of people are going to be real happy, and a whole bunch of people are going to be really upset. But I just see this as a compromise, and I really, really appreciate the fact that there's been an attempt here to come up with something that might be workable in the middle, but I don't think this one is workable.
So, Stacy, do we need a motion before we continue and can take a vote on this?
We can take a motion, we can continue. We've done it each way.
Okay, I'll move then to, I don't think it implies my vote, but I'll move to approve the recommendation to get us to the point of a vote.
Okay, so we have a motion that's been moved. Is there a second? I'll second.
It's hard for me to hear each other on here. What was your motion? I can't, I mean,
I said, I'm making a motion to get us to the point of a vote on the recommendation. My understanding of the procedure is that we would need a motion so that we can vote on it one way or the other, I guess.
Okay.
One of the challenges is you are likely to be able to hear us better than we can hear ourselves because of this microphone situation, so bear with us.
So Todd moved that we adopt option 2.
So we have a motion, and then did we have a second? I seconded. Duh. Okay. So discussion.
So Alan shared his thoughts. I've shared most of what I'd like to say between discussions. You know, in my mind, things have certainly changed from when this a little bit of deja vu, but feels like we were here a few months ago, and I still favor an option at this point, and I think the way I would say that is the priorities for me would be, number one, in-person learning all year long for all kids. Or number two would be excluding as few kids as we can possibly exclude through close contacts and positive cases. And then the third option would be using masks as a tool to mitigate. And I'm not quite ready to get to that point tonight for myself, but that would be the next option that I would use in terms of mitigation before I'd like to see us move on any of those other two. So that's where I stand with it.
I appreciate Ellen's comments earlier that that we're going to make a decision. We probably will make a decision to vote up or down or that type of thing on this item, but a great many people are going to be upset, and the fact that you said that all of us care about your kids is absolutely true. And so I want to make sure that that's very clear. The other thing about this thing, and Jamie had mentioned this too, that the decision that's that's reached tonight, it's 16 days before school starts. That's a lifetime when it comes to this, when it comes to COVID. This thing can change twice between then. So in terms of what our requirements are and that type of thing. So I want to make sure that people don't take this as gospel that's going to continue on through the end of the year. The other thing I wanted to caution parents is that if your child can't wear a mask and is not able to, there's a chance if we adopt an optional or mask situation, we could pivot to masks. So keep that in the back of your mind as to should I enroll in virtual school, that type of thing, because that's an option that could happen here. Off what Todd had said, I'm looking at in-person learning. To me is the ultimate here, and that's what we need to protect. But I'm also looking at the cases that are coming through, realizing that the number of cases that are reported is a lagging indicator. By our school district, it's 2 cases per day. And you look at the hospitalization rates for our students or students in that category, it's not very high. And I look at it and, being the thing I had the biggest issue with last year was close contacts. Because I saw I had a niece that got close contacts 6 times last year. She missed a good part of her senior year. Horrible situation. I heard reports of kids getting close contact 8 times. This is horrible. And the fact that we're able to do some type of leeway in there makes me feel very comfortable. But like Todd, I'm not ready to go with mandatory masking. Not even this option as well. I don't want to get in the business of splitting those that are eligible or those that are not eligible for vaccines in terms of the masking requirement. My vote tonight will be for optional. So.
Well, I guess it's my turn. I will not go for option 2 tonight either, just when it comes down to what the data says today. I'm going for optional masking for K through 12. Not because I'm an anti-masker or don't think masks work or don't work or whatever. I'm not even going to get into that argument, but I just think that it comes down to parent choice, staff choice, administration choice, whether you want to wear a mask or not at this time. May that change down the road? Absolutely. But for right now, with what the data says, I'm for option 1.
I want to say something about where the data is now. So when we look at the data, our numbers almost doubled in the last 10 days, right? If you look at, which slide is it from Jamie's?
Yeah, Aaron, just go to that summary page maybe.
Yeah, there you go. So we've doubled. Nope, the one that just has them listed in boxes.
Yellow one.
One more, there
Right
you go.
there, yeah. So we've almost doubled our numbers from July 30th to August 9th. And I don't have my glasses on, so I can't read it perfectly, but we've almost doubled. So if we almost double about every 10, 11 days, we will be at where we were in December in 30 days. And we will be nearly double that in 40 days. So if you look at the data and how quickly Delta spreads and how many people, it's like the RO factor, the math is really bad on this really fast, potentially. So I agree that we need to be willing to pivot, but I would sure hate to pivot too late. I would rather come out cautious, follow guidelines, and pivot away from mitigation efforts rather than come out, go red on the map, right, with a serious spread, and then have to backtrack, right, and have the one kid that's going to get really, really sick be in this first group of kids. So here's my other point, though. The CDC, the AAP, the Wisconsin DPI, the Wisconsin DHS, Pierce and St. Croix County Public Health, and the Wisconsin WASB all come out on the same side of this. UW River Falls went mask required today. Stout is mask required. Eau Claire is mask required. La Crosse is mask required. There's not even a discussion at the UW system level of if the CDC or AAP or DPI or DHS or Public Health has ulterior motives in their recommendations. They're all in line. Every single one of them is in line. The multi-layered approach. Vaccines, we're not going to keep track of. Masks is a gigantic, likely not, based on this conversation. We're not going to social distance because we can't. We're not going to cohort or have assigned seats. We're not going to close contact trace or quarantine. We're going to leave that up to parents. We're not going to monitor testing. The ventilation is better, and we're going to ask them to wash hands. And we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and we're going to say, could you wash your hands? There's no way, there is no way for me as an individual that I can go with not a single one of these mitigation layers when every expert in the area says you should go with probably all of them. So, and for people in general, in the public or on a school board, or I don't care what level you are, if you're not a public health expert that really understands how to dive into this data and understands the risk of it and understands how quickly it grows and really understands this, I don't even know what to say about us being willing to overrule all of those people. I would love to see the AAP or the CDC or even Pierce County, St. Croix County Public Health come into the River Falls School District and say, you guys are doing education wrong. I think your data is really, you know what, I'm reading something else into that. Let me tell you how to do education because I think you're wrong. That would never happen. Not in a million years. But that's exactly what we're doing. We're flipping that, and that's exactly what we're doing to public health. So who the public questions is going to shift. Right now, it's public health. It's going to be public education. It's going to be, the target always moves, right? And boy, when other public offices or folks are not respectful of the expertise of people in those areas, that puts us, that you talk about a slippery slope, that's the slippery slope. So it comes back around, and that's really disheartening to me. So I will vote with the experts unless somebody that knows more than those folks or can show me different data than we have seen, or there's other mitigation efforts that come in. I mean, we're virtually doing nothing. So, go ahead. Sorry, that's my vote.
I'm with you, Cindy. I think that the most responsible, safest thing that we can do is to have universal masking. I am in agreement that those agencies are the ones who provide the expertise and the guidance, and we should be following them. The only situation in which I would support this recommendation, option 2, is I think it's better than completely optional masks, because I think at least it would have some children, our most vulnerable, the ones who none of them can be vaccinated, would have some protection. But I do indeed think that the safest thing would be everybody in masks. And maybe someday we'll look back and think it was more conservative than we need to be. But when we're talking about children, I'd rather be safe than to look back and have regrets.
Well, and one more thing on top of that, Stacy, is if we say our top priority is keeping kids in school in person as long as we possibly can, and we want to close contact as few out as we can because we want them in school 5 days a week, but we choose not to mask, that doesn't match, right? So if we want to keep them if those in fact are our top 2 priorities, then masking becomes a no-brainer.
I think Dr. Morgan was really clear about that too, in terms of that in-person school has the potential to be able to support the social and emotional well-being of kids as well as their physical, medical health.
So I haven't had the chance to speak. I didn't particularly want to go last, but I will. So I have a hard time with the recommendation in making that split at the 12-year-old mark. And it's primarily due to the concerns that I raised at the last meeting, more of the social, emotional, and academic piece of this. But ultimately, I mentioned earlier that I was grateful for Dr. Morgan for coming here tonight because I think it's important that we share information with our community. And I would prefer to make a recommendation to our parents and our community versus a mandate. And so that ultimately is why I'm having a hard time with making masks mandatory. Because just the way a doctor makes a recommendation to a patient, it's the doctor's job to give all of the information to the patient, and then the patient is the one that decides ultimately what the decision is based on their own evaluation of the information and their own personal set of circumstances. And so as a school board member at this point in time, given the information we have, I would much prefer to be very transparent with our community in the way that Mr. Benson did all last year in keeping the community informed and what's going on as far as infection rate in our community and vaccination rate and cases. I would much rather prefer we be very transparent, perhaps make recommendations, but I have a hard time mandating things like masks. So that's ultimately where I stand.
So we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. I think anybody else wish to speak to it? Then I think we should take a roll call vote. I'm going to start with you, Lindsay.
No.
Doug? Cindy?
No.
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 No. And I'm voting no, so the motion has failed. So is there another motion to go before the board?
I'd like to move that we go pre-K through 12, mask mandatory in the schools.
Is there a second? I'll second. Any discussion?
I'd like to, I guess, just maybe respond a little bit, and I think the way I look at this for myself in regard to Cindy's comments, there's nothing that I'm going to disagree. I think the only thing that is different in my view is imagine a teeter-totter, and somebody is here mask mandatory, somebody's here mask optional, and there's a balance. And I think the thing that I see us all struggling with is that point might be different for all of us, and I don't hear anyone saying that it probably couldn't get to that point for them, but just maybe a little bit of a difference of opinion on where the balance of that teeter-totter might be in some people's minds right now. So I'm I wouldn't disagree with those things. I'd just say that I'm in a little bit different point in terms of that balance myself.
I'd just like to say one more thing too. Over the last 18 months, Alan, you indicated that our administrators are really good, right? And that's one thing that I really appreciated last year, was that they made decisions on a dime, and we changed things on a dime, and we pinpointed where problems were and shut it down or did whatever we had to do. And I am going into this school year with complete confidence that these same administrators have learned a lot over the last 18 months. I don't pretend to know any more than anybody else, but the one thing that I am very clear on is that our administration is smart and they're quick and they are not afraid to pivot. And so right now, today, that's why I am choosing the optional, is because today we have 16 more days. We can see what happens in 16 more days. It may change drastically. And I have full confidence that administration will come back and say, you know what, it's not working. You know what, school starts tomorrow and the numbers are way up. We have to go to mandatory masks. So kudos, first of all, to you, but that's why I am where I am, just because it's August 9th, and we can watch, and we can try and figure things out, but that's why I'm sticking with option 1 for right now, is just because I have confidence in our administration.
Amy, that helps me as well with my decision for option 1. I know that that our administration is completely tuned into what's going on in the community, in the classroom, the health of our students, that type of thing. So that gives me the confidence to go with option number 1. Yep. If I didn't have the confidence in this administration, I'd probably do 2 or 3 pretty easily. But if I, just because I was gonna say, I am very confident in them being able to make a recommendation that things have changed drastically. We need to change course.
So I do want to make that very clear, is that even if we do go to if we vote for masks optional tonight, it can pivot at any point. But I do look at the social emotional, and I do think that it's important for teachers and students to get to know each other before the mask is on. And
I think it's hard to measure the social emotional impact when there were so many other things happening last year.
Oh, for sure.
Right, when students were out and they were close contacting out, 4, 5, 6 times, and it was so inconsistent. So the social emotional, I don't know that we can attribute it specifically to masks. There's way too many layers, and way too many layers that are bigger than masks, right, to know that for sure. The other thing is, in a situation where it's a community spread issue, that makes a difference in whether it's an individual decision or not, right? So generally, I'm in favor of, they're my kids, and I should be able to make those decisions for them. And I think that's true in a lot of ways. I think that's true. I'm a former coach, so I think of teams, right? Our community is a team. Sometimes on teams, you have to do what's best for the team, even though it's not maybe what makes you the happiest at that particular time, because that's what gives your team the best chance to succeed. Other times, it's what's best for the individual. This, when it's a public spread issue, that is a community issue more so than an individual. It impacts individuals, but the decision has to be as a community to do this together or not. The other thing I want to say, when we look at other things in public decisions, we look at prevention, right? We wear seatbelts, and most of us will hopefully never need that seatbelt, right, to make a difference. We put our kids in car seats. Most of us will never need that car seat, hopefully, to save that kid. When we do, how many students in Pierce County, since we'd like to look at just Pierce County, how many students in Pierce County were killed by a school intruder before a school spent millions of dollars putting in prevention measures to secure our schools, right? We have kids going through intruder training. We have kids barricading doors. We have things like that. And how many kids have been killed by an intruder in Pierce County? So it's prevention, right, is the key. We didn't wait for a kid to die in River Falls from a school intruder before we put those prevention measures in. So the other thing, if we go mask optional, here's what's happening. We're not giving parents any option for mitigation efforts for kids that have no option to get vaccinated. Right, so that the page turning for under 12 to get vaccinated, that's a page turner to me, right? I'm still not totally sure if I would go mask optional for everybody, because I'm not really in favor of 8-year-olds going to school deciding if they should be wearing a mask or not, which is what mask optional does, when the adults can't decide. So that's where I'm at. And part of the discussion, just so everybody understands, part of the discussion is, if there's a question about if everybody's decision is made coming in, everybody's decision is not made coming in. Some of us are. But there are things that we can say and talk about and discuss as a group because of the way we function as a board that can move each other, right, on how we're thinking or how we might vote or when we're willing to pivot or things like that. And I would say the same with the relationship with the administrative team. They move what we're thinking sometimes, and we move what they're thinking sometimes, and that's the functioning of a good school board. So I have heard what everybody says, and part of my role here is to do my darndest to get you to move. So I think that's pretty much my best shot.
I think, Cindy, you raised some good points, especially about your comments about the quality and source of data. As a public body, we're not going to go to the internet and look for stuff and pick and choose stuff. We need to go to established bodies, because we're an established body, and look at that and use that for our best guidance. And I think that's important. I'll make one other statement. I said this last week. You mentioned it just now. The history of this board, the history of this district, the history of this board is that our deep concern for student safety has always been premised by the fact that it should be preventative, not reactive. And we do that in everything. And I just think we ought to be consistent here, and that we ought to approach this in a preventative way. I trust that we can pivot. I worry about us pivoting, in part because it goes against the way in which we approach most of the safety things around students, and that we ought to think about this as being preventative.
Any other comments on the motion that's been moved and seconded? I'm going to take a roll call vote. Cindy?
So let me clarify. We're voting on pre-K through 12, mask required in our schools.
Correct. That's the motion that's on the floor.
Okay, yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes?
No.
No.
The motion fails. We are not having clapping. The board has already taken public comment. This is time for the board to do its work. So, now what is next?
I'd like to make a motion that we do the close contact screening as the CDC, the AAP, the DPI, the DHS, Pierce County Public Health, and the WASB organization suggests, with 6 feet if students are unmasked, 3 feet if students are masked, which they're not going to be. So do the close quarantine, or the close contact, the close contact screening for students to be screened to stay home, as recommended by those organizations, if we're not going to do masks. So that's my motion is for close contacts, to go back to close contacts at 6 feet, as suggested by those organizations.
So the guidance from the agencies that you mentioned state that if you're wearing a mask, it's 3 feet.
Yep.
If you're not wearing a mask, it's 6 feet.
Yep.
If we are in an optional mode, there will be some pretty steep challenges for our staff to identify who had a mask on which day, who did not have on a mask which day, and I'm just adding that for background information to your motion.
Yep,
And so that argues in favor of it would be the 6 feet
exactly, for everybody.
for everybody, regardless, because,
Yep,
so that's what your motion is.
yep.
Is there a second?
Just to clarify, Cindy, are you saying it's a 6-foot rule across the board?
Yep.
Okay, then that's not the guidance of the CDC and all those other agencies, just to be clear.
It is if students aren't wearing masks, we're not going to be able to monitor that.
If they're not wearing a mask.
It also is if students are unvaccinated, which we're not going to be keeping track of vaccinated, whether students are vaccinated or not. So because those other things are off the table, I think we can't monitor the 3 feet versus 6 feet because it depends, right, on the students.
Yep, I just wanted to make sure, as people are debating how they want to line up on the vote, that there was a clear understanding. I'm not arguing with you. I just wanted to make sure there was clarity on that.
But let's go back to what the implications would be for a student who's vaccinated. If there is a close contact situation and we know that the student has been vaccinated, would
They get a
it
free
be
pass. They would not be traced out.
mask or no mask?
Correct.
And how does that remind me? I've got so many things in my head. How does that match with CDC? That would not match unless we know for sure that the student's been wearing a mask. Is that correct?
Yeah, I get mixed messages. We may need to revisit an answer on that. I think with what they are calling now the breakthrough, where this new variant is breaking through and infecting those who have already been vaccinated in some cases. I don't recall if they adjusted their guidance on that differently or not. I'm of the belief that if you're vaccinated, you get a free pass is supported by, currently supported by our county health department. I've talked with her several times on the phone in recent weeks. I think the answer is you get a free pass if you're vaccinated.
So the latest recommendation that I've seen
Not traced out.
You're not traced out, but if you're a close contact and you're vaccinated, you should mask for 3 to 4 days and then monitor. You're supposed to get tested, right, at day 3 or 4, and then you can take your mask off if you get a negative, but you don't get traced out. But they recommend that until you have a couple of days to see if you develop symptoms, that you still wear a mask during that time.
Yeah, monitor your symptoms,
Yep.
obviously keep an eye on yourself, you've been
Yep.
exposed.
I'm wondering.
But bottom line is, but you're agreeing with me, Cindy, that you do not get traced out.
Right.
If you are vaccinated.
Right.
I'm wondering, Cindy, if you would be okay if we put your motion on hold, because it seems like it is predicated upon what we decide as a board about masks. And so if we had a decision about masks, then we would go and look at the implications for close contact, for quarantine, for those issues.
Got it.
Would
Yep.
that be acceptable to you?
Sure.
I think the rule of order is that it dies for lack of a second, and we can move on to another motion in which there can be a subsequent motion after that if we want to redo
That's
it.
what's just happened now, because it hasn't had a second. So is there another motion?
I move that we adapt option 1, which is masks optional.
To adopt
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Second.
So we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Are there comments, questions?
I shouldn't say that. I'll make a comment. I like Lindsay's idea of strongly suggesting or making a recommendation before I'm going to vote yes, but I might choose to send my kids to school with a mask on, and I would trust that they would wear a mask if I asked them to and explain to them why we were doing it. Preventative measures or our personal choice to do that. I do feel pretty good in the ability to manage some of the dynamics in the buildings that may go on with people wearing masks, people not wearing masks, and our ability to control that message and accept people for the choice that they've made there. And I would be awfully disappointed, and it would probably change my mind in regard to it if I heard that that wasn't necessarily the case moving forward too. So I do like the idea of saying that we would prefer to see it before I would like to mandate it myself, and I do think that's a good idea. Again, it might be something that I would choose to do for my family, and I think that might make a difference for a lot of people in the district too.
I do want to point out that we are within the perennial tension between individual choice and the common good. There is always a tension between those, which is why we don't have people smoking in school, because if they want to do that, the implications are secondhand smoke for other people. And so when we choose, or if this board moves to choose to have masks optional, we are only allowing the wearer of the mask to have the benefit of masking. We are not contributing to the benefit to the common good of people wearing masks. So we should recognize that implication.
I would make one more statement about all three of these options, whichever option we would have had. I just want to give some credit to the teachers and staff in all of our buildings who are going to have to make this work. We've had a lot of conversation here tonight and last week about parents, and parents are key to everything in this district, except when it comes to the classroom, and that's where the teachers and the staff step in, and our teachers are phenomenal here, and they've got another tough year ahead of them. So whatever we do with masks, they're going to have to mediate all of the mask conversations, and we can only hope that parents will be supportive of mask decisions, health decisions, and people's choices that they're making in this. So.
As I was working through these three options and thinking if there was a fourth option out there, which I never did discover, one of the things that caused me concern about option number one is the real possibility of children being teased and harassed and that type of thing, whether it be by another student, which students, I was a kid, they're kind of ruthless as far as teasing and that type of thing. But it causes me a lot of concern if that's going to happen, if someone that chooses to wear a mask or a family that chooses to wear a mask, which is completely fine. I just don't want to see that child teased. I think it really goes back to our character education portion. It goes back to the parenting too, just respecting people's choices. Maybe they're not the same as our choice, but we should respect those choices. So that to me had a big made me struggle with option one. I just don't want to see children ostracized by a choice that they make or their family makes on each side of it, whether they choose to mask or they choose not to mask. That's a concern of mine. So.
I think we put students in that position though, right? When we split the space, kids are going to pick on each other for wearing the wrong T-shirt.
Yeah, they are. Yep, absolutely.
So to go, geez, you guys really shouldn't pick on each other for your mask choices is just, that's...
Or not wearing a mask.
Or not wearing a mask.
You're really talking about teasing on that side.
We've heard stories about that, all right? We got about 40 emails about that. So, so to go in and assume if we say, it's you decide, right? And also knowing for the families that do want to mask, the mitigation that we remove from those folks, even if they wear masks. Dr. Morgan stood in front of us and said, oof, that, for one kid to mask in a community, the person you're across from isn't masked, you remove really most of the mitigation from that person from you wearing a mask. So, let's not pretend to have the conversation of, geez, I hope they don't tease each other. That's a given, the social structure in a school that we're setting these kids up for of being optional. So, and don't put it on the teachers either. I think they've had a pretty rough year. And to say, you know what, you guys make sure they don't bully them. That's not even real.
Well, I clarify, if it is optional, are you I just want to clarify. Are you saying that if you have a mask on, you are not subjected to the 6-foot close contact rule?
If you have a mask on, it's a 3-foot rule,
Okay.
regardless of vaccination status.
If the person that tested positive was also masked, if everybody in that space was masked, which they're not going to be. So you can assume that everybody's going to be 6 feet if we go mask optional. That's your question, right?
No, I just wanted to go a little bit deeper. So if you have somebody who's masked and somebody who's not masked.
Yep.
6-foot rule for those who do not have a mask on, 3-foot rule for those that do.
That's what I wanted.
Now, to be clear, Cindy brought up a motion earlier because what I had indicated during my presentation, I wanted to make it clear to the board and to the public that we're not necessarily proposing that we start with that 6-foot, 3-foot rule. Cindy wants to, after this motion is done, come back and revisit that issue.
I want to underline one of the things that Amy brought up and that Bob also commented on, and that has to do with the trust that Amy has, and I think all of us share, in the administration to monitor and to make these difficult decisions about a shift. I really do share that confidence that our administrators will be able to do that. But I also want everybody to recognize, board members, community members, parents, everybody, that we owe them, our administrators, our superintendent, more than appreciation on this. We owe them our respect to be willing to follow and to support the recommendations that we have placed in their hands. Because Jamie just said that it's a blessing and a curse. And when I know the burden that I have felt imagining how I'm going to come down on this, it's smaller than the burden that Jamie will have to implement this and to make the judgments. So while I'm appreciative that everybody recognizes and is thankful to their work, we need to do more than that. Are there any other comments on this motion? Then we're going to do a roll call. Lindsay?
Yes.
Stacy, we're voting on if masking will be optional pre-K. Sorry, we've talked about,
Correct.
I've had 15 things go through my head since then.
I know the feeling. At this point, the motion that's been moved and seconded is that masks will be optional pre-K-12 in the River Falls School District. Everybody recognizing that there will be the potential for pivoting. And Lindsay has voted yes.
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
I'm voting no.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
The motion is carried. And now at this point, Cindy, do you have another motion that you would like to make?
Yep, I would like to move that we go to in the close contact quarantine recommendation in the roadmap 2, that we move right away to the 6-foot rule for close contact quarantine.
For all students, no matter.
For
so you're saying something different from what Jamie is saying.
Well, if
Correct?
if everybody's wearing a mask, the guidance is if everybody's wearing a mask, that you can go to 3 feet, and that's fine, right? If the student is, if I'm a close contact and I'm vaccinated, then I don't get screened out. That's the guidance. But because we're not keeping track of who's vaccinated. Now, if we want to make it optional that a student can prove that they're vaccinated, that's fine. That's a different conversation. But to assume, I think we have to assume that in that space, they're not going to be masked. If there's a way we can keep track of it, I'm not in that spot keeping track of it. I don't know how we can keep track of if a kid tests positive, if they had a mask on at that particular time based on all their close contacts. That sounds like a nightmare to me. So the guidance is different than what I'm suggesting because of the other decisions that we're making. Jamie, maybe you can summarize.
Yeah, no,
that.
I even alluded to what you just said was going to be difficult for our administrators, our teachers, our staff to, if it's optional, there'll be some challenges on identifying whether it's a 6-foot rule or a 3-foot rule, whatever it is. There's going to be challenges with who had their mask on and who didn't on which day and so on. We were not perfect last year when we did contact tracing, and we certainly won't be perfect with whatever the board comes up with. but quite frankly, we were pretty darn good at it. We didn't over-identify, we didn't under-identify, certainly not on purpose, but we probably missed some people here and there.
So what I'm hearing Cindy say is basically do what we did last year for contact tracing. Is that? Yeah, I'm just trying to summarize it so we all know what that means.
6-foot rule is what we had last year, that's right.
6-foot rule is what we had last year. But listen, I would like to have a conversation about if a student wants to show that they're vaccinated. I mean, if we're at 30% vaccination rate, and if a student is vaccinated and wants to show that they don't have to be screened out, because that's not dependent on the mask. That's only dependent on the vaccine. If as a board we can have that conversation, that's great. If we're not willing to even entertain asking a student if they would like to, as a parent, I would like the option to show, you know what, my student is vaccinated, I would like them not screened out even though they're a close contact. But not everybody feels that way. I would like to know where the board is on that. Because if the board is on board, great, then I'm all for going with that. Go ahead, Stacy.
I support that, of making that if a student is vaccinated and wants to be able to demonstrate that, in my opinion, why wouldn't we take that into account? It's definitely
You'd have to know that now. I mean, you know, given that we're saying right now, if the guidance is if you're vaccinated, that you wouldn't be contact traced out, you'd have to be able to know that one way or the other, regardless of you know, kind of what you're proposing, right? It would still have to be known one way or the other.
You know, I don't remember voting on this last year, but we got it. We had it in place. Why do we need to vote on it this year? I mean, is this an administrative thing that could be handled, or do we need to vote it on policy? We didn't, because we didn't vote that policy in.
No, we didn't vote on this.
We voted on 3 feet. As a board, we voted 3 feet, that we would close contact at 3 feet instead of 6 feet.
Back in May we did.
Yeah, we did.
It was part of the roadmap the first time.
All right,
around.
okay.
That's right.
And the recommendation is part of the roadmap this time of what, right now, it's no close contact tracing at all. You're just gonna let the parent know that their kid's a close contact.
It makes me think about the Swiss cheese thing that Dr. Morgan was talking about. We have already removed now a significant mitigation strategy. It does not seem to me to be wise to take away yet another layer. So I would think that would be wise to keep that in place, with the understanding that vaccination does change the situation for an individual child.
Regarding the close contact, currently it's at 3 feet, correct? That stands
If
from this.
you are wearing a mask.
Okay, so.
The CDC and all of the other agencies last year stuck to the 6-foot rule, last school year. Since then, they modified and said, okay, now we're down to a 3-foot rule if you're wearing a mask.
Does that take into account the Delta variant?
They have not changed their guidance. It is still a 3-foot rule if wearing a mask, and if you're not wearing a mask, it's 6 feet. They haven't changed based on the Delta.
So is that your motion?
Is what the motion? What's the question, Stacy?
What Jamie just said.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
That would follow the CDC. That would follow all of the recommendations from those health organizations. Sure. And we can even leave the 3-foot mask in there if you want. And if you can't tell, then they're out.
Yeah.
And if you know for sure, at least that leaves the option for you to make that decision.
And if we're looking at vaccination, if we can demonstrate that, then you have that variable to play around with too in individual circumstances.
Yep, and if a student doesn't want to show they're vaccinated, then that's fine too, and that's
their decision.
So here's my concern about the close contacting is if we go back to what we did last year, it would be important, I think, to know how many of those students that are close contacted actually in fact test positive, because that could guide our decision moving forward. So if we start, let's just say we start at 6 feet unmasked, is it possible for us to have that data and really track it diligently so that we can look and say, wow, we've had 6 feet close contacting in place for 3, 4, 6 weeks or whatever, and very few of these students are testing positive. Let's roll that back. Is that something that we have access to or that can inform our decisions?
We could track that, but remember, we don't know everybody's status in terms of testing positive. There could be people who are asymptomatic. And so we could have data, but it's not necessarily going to be reflective of the reality.
Yeah, I asked that question of a elementary principal probably 3 months ago, and I said, what percentage are testing positive after close contact? And he said very few, because the incentive is to get tested, prove a negative test, and then come on in and say, I'm negative, I want back in class.
And you can come back earlier by providing
absolutely,
a negative test, right?
because the incentive was to provide a negative test so I can get back in the classroom earlier. So parents were running out and getting their child tested, and if they came back with a negative test, they produced it. So, and this particular principal said most are coming back with negative
Which you're
tests.
reminding me the other half of this, just so the board understands too, what it means if you are identified as a close contact. The quarantine piece means, old rule, 14 days you stay home. During the middle of the school year, they changed it to a 10-day rule. You stay home. In the new 10-day rule, if after day 6 or 7 you test, as Bob is pointing out, negative, you can come back to school on day 8 if you're symptom-free for 24 hours and yada, yada, yada.
I've asked that question of multiple people too, and I think they would tell you gray area, because you could have kids who spent time together outside of school for an entire weekend, and they happen to be sitting next to each other at the lunch table, or in a class with masks, and how do you prove where the transmission did or didn't happen if they both test positive? The other answer that we've received from AZ Snyder is, unless you have universal testing, to Stacy's point, you can't know because not everyone's getting tested. It increased when there was an incentive to test to show you were negative, but so the way I've heard it is likelihood very low, but too many other variables that you can't entirely isolate is, without a little bit more information. And so I've tried to get that same answer, and it seems pretty cut and dry, but there's a little bit more nuance to it, I'm finding out.
Our kids they're associated with so many different people and so many different environments, whether it be home, neighborhood, school, church, whatever it may be. So, yeah. A lot of opportunities for exposure.
So we can't tell.
Yeah.
It's really helpful, isn't it? Yeah, welcome.
It's whatever you want the answer to be, then that's this thing.
So we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Yeah, you gotta remind me what the motion is.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you could
6-foot rule with no mask, 3-foot rule if you're wearing a mask. Presumably, my little crystal ball says, with the vote you took earlier on optional masks, there will be, based on summer school, what I saw, based on uptick in concern, we're gonna have, first day of school, we'll have 10% of the kids wearing masks. I mentioned that back on the topic of 6-foot rule basically is going to apply to everybody else that's not wearing a mask. We will do our best, if you're wearing a mask, that you get to be determined at that 3-foot margin instead of the 6-foot margin for close contact. We'll do that.
And same with vaccinated individuals are not screened out. If they show that they're vaccinated or however we decide to do that, they are not screened out at all.
Also, just to clarify for this vote, the understanding why Cindy's bringing this up is because I explained we'll do that as we shift or pivot. We'll do that 3-foot, 6-foot rule, but coming out of the gate right now, our plan would be to not do that. We would inform parents, your son or daughter has been exposed in a classroom where someone has tested positive. Please keep an eye on their symptoms. Get them tested if you choose to. Keep them home if they're ill. Otherwise, we'll see you at school tomorrow.
Yep, and keep in mind that Delta variant has a RO of 6 to 10, so the average positive test will infect 6 to 10 people, which is 3 times more than the original COVID issue. So having those students in school without masks is a problem. Plus, the other thing is if we're going to say we encourage or we want to encourage masks, and if we have any support for any of these organizations and encourage vaccines, at least there's some incentive for students that are masking and that are vaccinated, right? Otherwise, we can't do any less than we would be doing.
Cindy, here's where I'm stuck.
Yeah.
That sounds great to have an incentive. It sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
It sounds difficult in practice.
Say more, Amy.
And I just feel like we're putting I understand why you're saying, I understand that does give incentive for people to wear masks, but that feels like a big burden on staff.
That day I was wearing a mask, but today I'm not.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't know how you can, I don't know how you could track that.
Yeah, I think if there's any question, we have to err to the 6 feet, right? Situation. But if it's a situation that you test positive from somebody that you were the only person that whatever had a group project that right? If there's a situation that we know that both people had masks on, there's probably not going to be very many with mask optional, to be honest. It's probably usually going to be 6 feet. But I would like to leave the option open for administrators and teachers to be able to say, we know that this kid was only with that kid, and we know they both were wearing masks in that situation. If they know, I would like to give them the option. If they don't know, then it's 6 feet.
You know, it seems to me that the 6 or 3 feet thing is only one of many other issues we're going to deal with in a mask optional situation. And I'm wondering, I don't want to necessarily kick the can down the road, but I'm wondering if maybe we don't need to listen to the results next week of some administrative staff meetings and discussions about this. And there may be a proposal they could come back and talk to us about what might be workable in terms of, there might be more than just the 3 or 6 foot thing. So,
Boy, I'm in favor of that.
I don't know, and I'm not quite sure. I know exactly what you're saying from the standpoint of this is one more mitigating thing. I have the feeling that there might be more. And if we could allow them to think about it some more, I would maybe like to see their thoughts now about how are they going to approach mask optional, and do they have some thoughts about 3 foot, 6 foot? Because we're going to have a meeting next week anyway. We got a regular board meeting, and we could just ask to come back to that.
School doesn't start till the 1st of September, so
That's fine, but I also think they already came out with their recommendation. It's part of the roadmap. It's not like they came out just with a mask.
Yeah.
They came up with their recommendation based on
split K6.
So we'll kick the can back to them right now.
Well, and here's the other thing. I think this creates more questions for I think resolving the close contact issues and questions takes more time than resolving a mask question. So I'm concerned about kicking it too far down the road. Right? Because I think it's harder. I think
we have to have a meeting next week. The agenda has to be posted on Friday. I would suggest we table this motion until next Monday.
Well, the other thing is, the administration worked on the implications of implementing their recommendation, and since that's fallen, there needs some other time to be able to figure this out. Plus, as we've all demonstrated, it's hard to keep track of what the motion is and all of that right now. So maybe it does make sense for us to agree to table this now, ask the administration to now figure out what it's going to look like to have a mask optional policy, at least as of right now. We don't know how long it will last, but right now in our schools. Is that okay with everybody?
And
have another meeting next
Cindy
week.
has to agree to table.
Cindy,
and we'll
is that okay with
we'll
you?
revisit the close contact quarantine issue, what the proposal would be to make that potentially different than in Roadmap 2, right? So, but we'll talk about that next week.
And I think then we can have it in front of us in a document where we're really looking at what all of the specific things are.
One more piece of information, just so the board can think about this in the next week as well, just some more kind of the backstory detail on how this worked last year. I'll just put it in those terms with close contact quarantine. Last year it was a 6-foot rule and everybody had a mask on. We would develop our close contact list, and that is called a line list. It's a list of names of people that were within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more of someone who tested positive. We, as a district, made every individual phone call to every single parent last year. And we gave the line list to the county health department, who then would send an email to all of these individual people and said, "You've been identified as a close contact. Please follow the procedures of quarantine listed in this email," yada, 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 which is the 10-day rule, test after day 6, 7, you can come back on day 8, stay in your house, lock her down, don't expose to other people, yada, yada, yada. I want you to understand that the way that the proposal was brought to you tonight was, we're not at level 1, we're not creating a line list. We're not giving a line, we're not doing contact tracing in its true form. Just to be clear, the proposal brought to you tonight was send a letter, do our best to identify. If it's a 3rd grader, we're going to send a letter home to all the 3rd grade parents in Mrs. Smith's class, and we're going to say, just letting you know your son or daughter was exposed to somebody who is now tested positive. You might want to keep an eye on your child's symptoms. You may want to get them tested, keep them home if they're sick. Otherwise, we'll see you at school tomorrow. Just wanted to repeat all that, that was the level 1 approach, and we were saying, asterisk, disclaimer, this too could change, just like the masking rule could change. If things go south, which trajectory says it's going to go south, folks, all these things could change in a matter of weeks, months, whatever. I just wanted to be clear that you understood what is in the Wildcat roadmap right now with this level 1, level 2 approach to contact tracing. I'll be quiet now.
So I actually get the choice whether we want to table this or not. Is this true? Is this true, Stacy? I get because I made the motion. Todd said I get to make that decision, so I might hold Todd to that. He doesn't throw things my way very often, so.
Oh, that you get to make the decision on this?
Yes.
Yeah.
I get to make a decision tonight, Todd. Here we go. Here's the deal. I need to lighten up a little bit because this is stressing me out. Okay. So, just a minute. They're the people I need to hear me.
She's waiting for you, Stacy.
Sorry, I'm talking to my neighbor.
That's good. I can appreciate that. So if we table this, I'm okay. I'm happy to table this, but I just want to make sure that we understand. If the administration sits down and talks about it this week with the optional mask K-12, pre-K-12, understand, I'm okay with coming back with, can we social distance, or can we go cohorts, or can we close contact, or can we go testing? So I don't want to narrow it too much for you all if you're going to have that conversation this week. I just would like to have something on the list of, and the more the better, right? The more pieces of Swiss cheese, the better, that is being recommended. So know that that table is open if we table this as far as I'm concerned. But
how does this suggestion work? The recommended action today was really to approve Wildcat Roadmap 2.0. We did not do that in our motion. Our motion had to do with masks optional. It did not look at all of the other aspects of Wildcat Roadmap 2.0. So what if next week we take up that order of business, including close contacts, including the other layers of mitigation, so that we are all clear, so that we're able to tell the community what all of this is about in Wildcat Roadmap 2. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes.
Because it would be a comprehensive review.
Because it's the details we've got to fill in here that we're all comfortable with, and I think it would be really good for us to act on that next week.
So we're now transitioning. So you have nicely withdrawn your motion, and we're going to revisit it. So, yes. So we're now at 5, and that has to do with proposed or suggested items for future agendas, and the number 1 thing that we will be looking at next week will be the comprehensive Wildcat Roadmap 2.0 plan with all of the implications of based on what we did tonight. Is that okay with everybody? We've got that?
Yep.
Okay, other agenda items.
no masks on the agenda, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hope we never have to do this again. Okay. We are going to schedule upcoming meetings. The next regular Board of Education meeting will be Monday, August 16th at 6 o'clock. There will be a new teacher meet and greet Monday, August 23, 4 to 5. That's at juniors. I'm hoping everybody can come. If you haven't RSVP'd, please make sure you do that to Jennifer Peterson or to Amanda Taylor. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It's good to have good colleagues.
I have two
And the meeting
copies.
is
I have
adjourned.
printed off.
I already got one.